Hello there. Welcome to the Science Owl Station channel. Today we wander softly into the fragrant and ancient world of herbs, where the leaves that brush against a garden wall, the stems steeping quietly in a cup, and the humble green sprigs resting beside a kitchen window carry stories far older than memory. As you listen, you might imagine a small herb garden at dusk, the air cooling, the soil holding the last warmth of the day, and the scent of basil, mint, and rosemary rising almost invisibly into the evening. Before we go any further, I'd love for you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from and what time the night or day has wrapped itself around you. And if this gentle journey brings you even a little peace, you can subscribe and like, so we may keep drifting together through quiet wonders like this one. Wherever you are, let the world slow down for a while. Soften your gaze, let the hum of life around you fade, and gently drift with us into tonight's quiet exploration. When we speak of herbs, we are speaking of a category of plants that feels both ordinary and strangely magical, as though the most familiar things in life often hide the deepest histories. An herb, in the simplest sense, is usually a plant valued for its leaves, stems, or flowers, often because it offers flavor, fragrance, healing, or comfort. These are the soft green parts, the tender living surfaces that catch light and wind and release their character when touched. A herb is often something you can crush lightly between your fingers and know immediately by scent, even before your eyes confirm its shape. Mint announces itself with cool brightness. Basil rises warm and sweet. Thyme feels dry and quiet, almost dusty in its perfume, like sunlight caught in tiny leaves. And yet herbs are so often spoken of alongside spices that the two begin to blur in the mind, as though they are siblings mistaken for one another at a distance. In everyday speech, people use the terms almost interchangeably, but there is a gentle and useful distinction. Herbs generally come from the leafy, green, softer parts of plants. Spices, by contrast, more often come from the tougher, deeper, or more concentrated structures. The seeds, bark, roots, berries, or dried fruits. Cinnamon is bark. Cumin is seed. Clove is a flower bud, dried and darkened into a tiny nail-shaped fragment. Ginger is root. Black pepper comes from dried fruit. Herbs tend to feel closer to the surface of the plant, closer to light and air, while spices seem to carry something drawn from depth, wood, seed, or hidden tissue. This difference is not absolute, of course. The natural world is rarely interested in our tidy boxes. Coriander offers both an herb and a spice, depending on whether we use its fresh leaves or its dried seeds. Dill, too, shifts form depending on how we meet it. So the line between herb and spice is not a wall, but more of a soft border, a place where categories breathe into one another. Still, the distinction helps us understand how humans have long related to plants, not only by naming them, but by noticing which part of a plant offers its gift. There is something deeply comforting about this. To think that for thousands of years, people have leaned close to plants and learned them part by part. Leaf for flavor, root for warmth, seed for sharpness, flower for calm, bark for bitterness. The knowledge did not arrive all at once, and it did not come from laboratories at first, but from hands, seasons, memory, and repetition. Someone tasted, someone steeped, someone noticed that one leaf soothed the stomach while another sharpened the appetite. Someone remembered which scent calmed a restless child and which bundle hung by the doorway seemed to keep insects away. Herbs belong to that long and patient education where humanity learned from the green world not through conquest but through attention. If you picture an herb garden now, you may notice how different it feels from an ordinary patch of green. Herb gardens invite closeness. They are not meant to be admired only from far away. They ask to be brushed past, pinched, inhaled, harvested in small amounts. They are intimate gardens. A rosemary bush, slightly dry and woody, seems to hold the memory of heat. Lemon balm gives off a bright softness as though summer itself had settled into its leaves. Sage feels almost velvety, pale, and thoughtful, the kind of plant that seems ancient even when young. Lavender stands somewhere between herb and ornament, medicinal and beautiful, useful and ceremonial all at once. That may be part of why herbs are so beloved. They do not live in only one world. They stand at the threshold between kitchen and medicine chest, between ritual and daily life, between science and memory. A herb can be garnish, remedy, perfume, symbol, tea, or offering. It can season a stew, ease a throat, scent a room, or mark a tradition passed quietly from one generation to the next. The same leaf may appear in a recipe, in a home remedy notebook, and in an old family story. Few things in life move so easily between the practical and the poetic. There is also a certain modesty to herbs that makes them easy to underestimate. They do not arrive with the dramatic scale of forests or the spectacle of flowering trees. They are often small. They fit in a clay pot. They grow on windowsills, along fence edges, beside stones warmed by sunlight. Their power is not theatrical. It is concentrated. A handful of leaves can transform a meal. A small sprig can perfume an entire room. A few crushed stems can release oils and compounds that plants evolved over ages to protect themselves, attract pollinators, or survive difficult conditions. What we experience as flavor or healing is often the language of plant chemistry, translated gently through the senses. And so, to understand herbs, we begin not with complexity, but with nearness. We begin by noticing that an herb is not just a plant, but a relationship between plant and person. A weed in one setting becomes a remedy in another. A garden border becomes a household pharmacy. A leaf becomes tea. A stem becomes broth. A scent becomes memory. Herbs are not only botanical objects. They are companions to human life, woven into cooking, healing, worship, comfort, and the quiet rituals of home. Perhaps that is why even the word herb seems to carry softness in it. It suggests something gathered rather than seized, something dried carefully, tied with string, laid on shelves, steeped in warm water, or folded into food at the last moment. It suggests patience. It suggests care. And in that sense, herbs teach us something about attention itself. To know herbs is to slow down enough to tell one leaf from another, one scent from the next, one effect from a rumor. It is to become observant in small ways and to trust that small things are not lesser things. Tonight, we have only opened the gate. We have stood at the entrance of the herb garden and learned the first distinction. Herbs and spices, leaf and seed, tenderness and concentration, surface and depth. But already the path begins to curve forward into deeper time, toward ancient burials, clay tablets, fragrant plant families, healing compounds, and the long companionship between human beings and the green medicines of the earth. And as we continue, The leaves around us may seem to grow quieter, as though they have been waiting a very long time to tell their story. As we move deeper into the story of herbs, the garden around us seems to grow older, quieter, and more mysterious, until the neat rows of modern pots and kitchen planters begin to fade into something far more ancient. The familiar scent of mint and thyme gives way to a darker, colder landscape, one of stone, wind, cave mouths, and the flickering uncertainty of prehistoric life. It is here, in this faraway world, that one of the most haunting ideas about herbs begins. That long before recorded history, before writing, before cities, before agriculture had fully reshaped the human future, plants may already have held a place not only in survival but in meaning. One of the most often repeated and deeply evocative claims in the story of herbs concerns the Neanderthals, our ancient human relatives, who lived tens of thousands of years ago across parts of Europe and Western Asia. According to a famous interpretation of archaeological evidence, Neanderthals may have buried their dead with flowers and medicinal herbs as early as 60,000 years ago. If true, this would mean that herbs were not merely gathered for food or practical healing, but were already present at one of the most solemn thresholds in human existence: death. The image is difficult to forget. A burial site in a cave, a body laid carefully into the earth. Around it, traces of pollen, quiet remnants of plant life surviving where flesh, fabric, and spoken grief vanished long ago. From these tiny grains, some researchers once imagined a moving scene, that the dead had been placed among flowers or herbs, perhaps as a sign of remembrance, perhaps as an offering, perhaps because even then, plants were thought to accompany the spirit or comfort the living left behind. It is a vision so tender that it has lingered in the cultural imagination ever since, half archaeological theory and half poetic echo. Whether every detail of that interpretation is accepted without question today is less important here than what the idea reveals about our longing to understand the relationship between early humans and the plant world. Even the possibility that herbs were present in burial practices suggests something remarkable: that plants may have mattered to our ancestors in ways far beyond calories. A bitter leaf, a fragrant stem, a flowering sprig, these could already have been associated with healing, memory, ritual, or protection. In the harshness of prehistoric existence, where cold, hunger, injury, and uncertainty shaped daily life, any plant that soothed pain, scented the air, or marked a sacred moment would have stood out sharply against the roughness of the world. It helps to pause and imagine what life was truly like for Neanderthals. This was not a world of abundance arranged on grocery shelves, nor a place where knowledge could be stored in books. It was a world learned directly through experience, with danger often close at hand. To survive, one had to know the landscape intimately: which roots nourished, which berries harmed, which leaves could be chewed, which plants eased a wound or calmed an irritated stomach. There were no labels, no pharmacies, no doctors in the modern sense. Knowledge lived in memory, imitation, and trial. It passed from person to person, generation to generation, likely through observation as careful as any later science, though expressed in entirely different ways. In such a world, herbs would have been more than decorative or secondary. They would have been woven into the very act of paying attention. A strong smell might mean a plant with useful oils. A bitter taste might hint at potency. A soothing leaf rubbed against skin could become part of remembered practice. plants were among the earliest teachers and human beings among the earliest students. It is not difficult to believe that this relationship began long before civilization. In fact, it would be harder to believe that it did not. And death, perhaps more than anything, sharpens the meanings of ordinary things. Even today, when people gather around grief, they reach instinctively for flowers, incense, candles, garlands, fragrant wood, and sacred leaves. We scent spaces of mourning. We lay petals on graves. We bring the living world to the edge of loss, as though scent and leaf and bloom could soften the finality of silence. If Neanderthals once placed herbs or flowers with their dead, then they were doing something profoundly human, using plant life to speak when language, if present at all, could not bear the whole burden. There is another possibility, too, less ceremonial but equally meaningful. Perhaps plants found near burials were not symbols of grief, but useful herbs gathered for healing, protection, or bedding. Some fragrant species repel insects. Some soften a resting place. Some mask odors. Some soothe the body. In that sense, the presence of herbs would still reveal a practical intimacy between humans and plants, one grounded in survival but open to symbolic interpretation. Human life has always mingled the practical and the sacred. A herb that protected the body might also comfort the mind. A plant used for healing might naturally become associated with passage, care, and memory. This is one of the most beautiful truths about herbs. They almost always inhabit more than one meaning at once. A plant can be medicine and ritual, can be useful and beloved. It can heal the skin while also marking a ceremony. It can flavor food and carry spiritual significance. The earliest humans may not have separated these categories the way modern societies often do. For them, perhaps, a plant's usefulness, mystery, scent, and symbolic force all belong to the same living reality. When we picture ancient graves touched by herbs, we are really seeing the beginnings of a worldview in which plants were companions in every stage of life. They stood beside hunger, illness, weather, birth, and death. They were part of the landscape, yes, but also part of culture long before culture was written down. A fragrant branch laid beside the dead would not only tell us something about the plant itself, it would tell us something about the people who placed it there. It would speak of care, of intention, of the desire to make meaning in a world that was often merciless. And perhaps that is why this early chapter in the history of herbs feels so moving. It reminds us that our connection to plants is older than agriculture manuals, older than monasteries, older than herbal handbooks and apothecary jars. It may reach back into deep human time, into caves where smoke drifted upward and voices echoed off stone, into evenings where survival depended on knowledge too subtle to be written, but too important to be forgotten. Somewhere in that long darkness, a person bent down, gathered a plant, and understood that it mattered. So when we grow herbs in pots today, when we clip basil into pasta or steep chamomile before sleep, we are participating in something astonishingly ancient. The gesture seems small, but its roots may reach into the earliest human instincts: to observe, to remember, to heal, to comfort, and to surround even life's hardest moments with the quiet presence of the green world. The story of herbs does not begin in books. It begins in the earth, in the hand, and perhaps in morning itself. And from those shadowed burials of prehistory, the path now leads forward toward the first civilizations that gave plant knowledge a more permanent form. The herbs that may once have been known only by memory and touch would eventually be impressed into clay, named, recorded, and carried into the dawn of written medicine. In the next chapter, the silence of caves gives way to the murmur of rivers and the first marks of human writing. From the dim stillness of prehistoric burial caves, we now step into a world of river valleys, sun-baked bricks, reed boats, and the first great cities rising from the earth. Human memory, which once had to carry everything alone, had begun to change shape. Knowledge was no longer held only in the mind, the hand, and the spoken tradition of elders. It could now be pressed into matter, fixed in symbols, and preserved beyond a single lifetime. This was one of humanity's quiet revolutions. And among the many things early civilizations chose to record: trade, law, kingship, prayer, taxation, astronomy, they also recorded plants. In this simple fact lies an extraordinary truth. Herbs mattered enough to become part of writing itself. One of the earliest known civilizations to leave behind written records of medicinal and practical plant use was the Sumerian civilization, which flourished in ancient Mesopotamia roughly 5,000 years ago, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. When we imagine herbs in this setting, we are no longer in a vague and shadowy prehistoric world, but in a place of temples, granaries, scribes, and irrigation canals. Civilization had become organized, urban, and increasingly complex. Yet even in this new world of administration and architecture, people still turned toward herbs for healing, care, and daily use. The Sumerians wrote on clay tablets using cuneiform, one of the world's earliest writing systems. A stylus would be pressed into soft clay, leaving wedge-shaped marks that could later harden in the sun or kiln, preserving words across millennia. There is something deeply beautiful about this image. A scribe bending over wet clay, recording not only the matters of empire, but also the names and uses of the natural world. Among these early records are references to herbs and plant-based preparations, including ingredients such as thyme and cumin, plants that still feel familiar to us now. The continuity is almost startling. A modern kitchen spice rack and an ancient medicinal record suddenly seem much closer than we might have imagined. Thyme, with its small leaves and dry, warming scent, was valued in the ancient world not only for flavor but also for its cleansing and medicinal qualities. Cumin, earthy and slightly bitter, was another deeply important plant, crossing the boundary between kitchen and remedy. In many early cultures, there was little reason to separate those worlds sharply. What seasoned food might also strengthen digestion. What preserved meat might also ward off illness. What smelled powerful might be thought powerful in effect. In this sense, the herbal traditions of the Sumerians remind us that the earliest medicine was inseparable from everyday life. Healing did not live in a separate institution. It lived in the household, the temple, the storehouse, the field, and the body's repeated encounters with the plant world. To record herbs on clay tablets was not a small gesture. Writing was precious, laborious, and meaningful. A plant did not enter written memory casually. If thyme or cumin appeared among these early records, it suggests that knowledge of their value had already become important enough to preserve. Someone had observed their effects. Someone had repeated their uses. Someone had decided that this knowledge should outlast the speaker. And once written, herbal knowledge could travel farther and survive longer than oral tradition alone. It could be copied, adapted, inherited, and elaborated. The leaf had entered history. This moment also marks something important in the evolution of medicine itself. Before writing, herbal knowledge depended heavily on memory and practice. It was intimate, local, and vulnerable to loss. A healer could die, and much might vanish with them. But once recorded, remedies could begin to accumulate. Plant knowledge could become part of a growing archive of human understanding. A civilization could compare what worked, preserve formulas, and pass methods across generations with more stability. In a way, the first herbal texts were early attempts to prevent forgetting. And still, for all their practical value, these clay tablets also carry a certain poetry. Clay is earth, after all. Plants grow from earth, and now their names were being pressed back into earth in another form. The medicinal life of herbs was being returned to the ground as inscription, made durable by fire and human intention. There is a circular beauty in that, leaves gathered from fields, then remembered in clay shaped by river mud. Civilization, in one of its earliest literary gestures, was speaking back to nature in the language of record. We should also remember that Mesopotamia was a crossroads of trade and exchange. Plants, seeds, resins, and aromatic substances moved along routes connecting different regions and cultures. Herbal knowledge was rarely static. It traveled with merchants, healers, priests, and migrating traditions. So even in these early Sumerian records, we may already be seeing the beginning of a great conversation across civilizations, one in which people learned from one another through the medium of plants. A useful herb in one place might become a treasured remedy in another. A fragrant seed might move from field to market, from ritual to kitchen, from medicine to myth. There is something deeply reassuring in this continuity. When we sprinkle thyme into soup or cumin into warm oil today, it can feel like an ordinary act. But behind that ordinary act stretches a line of human experience that reaches back thousands of years. Ancient cooks, healers, and scribes knew these plants too. They smelled them, stored them, measured them, trusted them, argued about them, and likely passed on opinions about them just as people still do now. The names may shift from language to language, but the relationship endures. Herbs remain among the oldest companions of civilization. The Sumerians, then, gave us more than just early urban life or early writing. They gave us one of the earliest surviving records of humanity's attempt to formalize herbal knowledge. To say, in effect, these plants matter, and we do not wish to lose what we know about them. That impulse still lives on in modern pharmacology, nutrition science, botanical classification, and home herbal practice alike. Every field guide, herbal handbook, and scientific paper is part of the same long tradition. The desire to observe a plant carefully and make that observation endure. As we stand for a moment beside those ancient clay tablets, it is impossible not to feel a certain tenderness toward the scribes and healers who first carried herbs into written history. They may not have known how long their marks would last, or how distant the readers would be. Yet across 5,000 years, their attention still reaches us. The wedge marks remain, the plant names endure, and the message, simple and profound, still whispers through the clay. Nature heals, memory matters, and what is useful should be preserved. From here, the story of herbs turns from written history toward the plants themselves, their shapes, families, and hidden botanical relationships. The next step takes us away from the tablet and back into the garden, where many of the world's most beloved culinary herbs reveal that they are not strangers at all, but members of one fragrant and remarkable family. Leaving behind the clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia, we return now to the garden itself, but we do so with new eyes. The herbs growing there are no longer just useful leaves or fragrant additions to food. They are relatives. Beneath their different shapes, colors, and scents, many of the most beloved culinary herbs in the world belong to a single botanical family, linked by shared structures, common chemistry, and a kind of aromatic kinship that has shaped kitchens, medicines, and gardens across continents. This family is called Lamiaceae, often known more simply as the mint family, though its members reach far beyond mint alone. At first glance, this may seem surprising. Mint feels cool and lively, basil feels sweet and tender, rosemary seems dry and resinous, and lavender rises delicate and floral. They do not seem, at least to the casual eye, as though they should belong at the same family table. Yet botany often reveals hidden relationships that ordinary experience only hints at. When plants are classified, they are grouped not by mood or culinary role, but by deeper structures: flower form, leaf arrangement, stem shape, reproductive anatomy, and other shared traits inherited through long evolutionary history. And in the case of many common herbs, those traits point back again and again to Lamiaceae. Once you know what to look for, the resemblance becomes easier to notice. Many members of the mint family have square stems, a detail so oddly specific that it feels almost charming. If you roll the stem of mint or basil gently between your fingers, you may sense subtle angles instead of a perfect roundness. Their leaves often grow in opposite pairs along the stem, facing one another in tidy balance. Their flowers frequently have a distinctive two-lipped shape, which is one reason the family is also sometimes called the dead nettle family in certain botanical traditions. And perhaps most memorably, many of them are rich in essential oils, those volatile aromatic compounds that burst into the air when a leaf is crushed or warmed by the sun. These oils are part of what make the mint family so beloved by humans. We experience them as fragrance and flavor, but to the plant they are tools of survival. Aromatic compounds can deter herbivores, protect against microbes, attract pollinators, and help the plant manage stress. What we interpret as pleasure often began as strategy. A rosemary bush does not smell resinous for our sake. It evolved that chemistry for its own life in dry and demanding conditions. Yet in one of those elegant meetings between nature and culture, humans discovered that these same compounds delighted the senses, preserved food, scented rooms, and sometimes offered medicinal effects as well. Consider mint, perhaps the most immediately recognizable member of the family. Cool, bright, and almost startling in its freshness, mint feels clean in a way few plants do. Its menthol-rich character has made it a favorite not only in teas and desserts, but in medicines, oral care, and rituals of refreshment around the world. Basil, by contrast, feels softer and warmer, almost sweet in some varieties, peppery or clove-like in others. It can seem lush, green, and almost tender-hearted compared to mint's sharp clarity. Yet both are kin, shaped by related floral patterns and aromatic tendencies. Their differences only variations on a shared family inheritance. Rosemary stands at another end of the family's personality range. Woody, needle-like, and intensely fragrant, it seems almost austere, a plant that remembers sun-baked slopes and Mediterranean wind. Lavender, too, has a certain dryness to its fragrance, though it transforms that quality into something floral, soft, and dreamlike. Sage, another member of the family, feels earthy and solemn, with velvety leaves that suggest age and wisdom even in youth. Thyme, small and quiet, releases its scent only when encouraged, but then offers a complexity far larger than its leaf size suggests. Oregano and marjoram join the same circle, carrying warmth and savory depth into countless dishes across cultures. When seen together, these herbs begin to feel less like separate ingredients and more like cousins with strong personalities. The Lamiaceae family is not just large, but astonishingly diverse. It includes thousands of species spread across the world, from ornamental flowers to medicinal plants to culinary staples. This diversity helps explain why the family appears so often in both kitchen and healing traditions. A botanical lineage, especially rich in aromatic chemistry, naturally becomes noticeable to human beings. We are drawn to scent. We remember it well. We build traditions around it. So it is no accident that many of the plants humans have cherished most closely, for flavor, comfort, tea, remedies, oils, and symbolic use, come from a family designed, by its own evolutionary path, to speak powerfully through aroma. There is also something satisfying about discovering that a garden can be read like a family gathering. Basil and mint may not behave alike, but they share deeper patterns. Lavender and rosemary may seem to belong to different emotional worlds, but their biology tells a story of connection. This hidden relatedness gives herb gardening an added layer of wonder. When you grow several of these plants together, you are not merely assembling a useful collection. In many cases, you are bringing together members of an ancient botanical clan that has long flourished in sunlight, dryness, and attention. For cooks, this relationship helps explain why many mint family herbs behave beautifully in similar culinary contexts, while still offering different accents. They pair well with oils, release aroma when bruised or heated, and often work in layered combinations. For herbalists, the shared chemistry of the family has long suggested overlapping themes: stimulation, digestion support, calming effects, antimicrobial action, aromatic clearing, and respiratory comfort, though each plant expresses these themes in its own way. For gardeners, the family resemblance can guide practical care. Many members of Lamiaceae appreciate sun, decent drainage, and the sort of neglect that prevents them from becoming weak and watery. They are often plants that prefer a little hardship over indulgence. That preference may itself be part of their charm. So many mint family herbs become most fragrant not in lush excess, but in restraint, under warm light, in relatively lean soil, with roots encouraged to work a little harder. Stress, in their case, can deepen character. Their oils intensify. Their scent concentrates. It is a botanical reminder that richness does not always come from abundance. Sometimes the most memorable flavors and aromas are produced where life has learned to be resourceful. When we understand herbs through their botanical family, we also begin to see how modern science and old intuition can meet. Gardeners long noticed that certain herbs felt related in growth habit or scent. Botanists later described the exact structures that confirmed those relationships. Cooks sensed affinities on the tongue. Scientists traced them in anatomy and chemistry. The same truth emerged by different paths. Many of the herbs humans love most are bound together by lineage. So the next time you brush your hand through basil, or rub rosemary between your fingers, or catch the cool breath of mint in evening air, you may be meeting not isolated plants, but members of one of the most aromatic and influential families in the botanical world. The herb garden becomes richer once you know this. It is no longer only a collection of flavors. It is a map of kinship, a cluster of green relatives whose shared biology helped make them unforgettable to civilization. And from this fragrant family of leaves and flowers, our journey now turns toward another quiet surprise: the extraordinary nutritional strength hidden in even the smallest handful of herbs. Tiny leaves, it seems, can carry far more than scent alone. Now that we have wandered through the botanical family tree of many beloved herbs, it is time to look even closer, not at their ancestry, but at what is quietly contained within their leaves. At first glance, herbs may seem too delicate, too light, too easily scattered by wind or chopped into garnish to matter very much nutritionally. We tend to think of nourishment in larger forms: bowls of grains, baskets of fruit, roots pulled from the ground, thick slices of bread, or plates of steaming vegetables. A sprig of parsley resting at the edge of a dish seems almost decorative by comparison, a final touch rather than a meaningful source of anything substantial. And yet herbs have a way of defying our sense of scale. Tiny leaves, when concentrated enough, can carry a startling density of nutrients. One of the most charming examples is parsley, a herb so common that it is often overlooked. In many meals, it appears as an afterthought, chopped over soup, scattered over roasted vegetables, tucked beside grilled food, or placed as a bright green flourish on a plate. Because it is familiar, it risks becoming invisible. But parsley is not nutritionally shy. A small serving of fresh parsley can provide a remarkable amount of vitamin K, along with a meaningful contribution of vitamin C and other plant compounds that support the body in subtle but important ways. It is a perfect reminder that modest-looking herbs are often miniature powerhouses. Vitamin K, in particular, plays a vital role in blood clotting and bone health. It helps the body use calcium properly and supports processes most people rarely think about until something goes wrong. To find such a powerful nutrient in a leafy herb used by the spoonful feels almost improbable, but that is often the logic of herbs. Small volume, strong concentration. Vitamin C, too, brings its own quiet usefulness, supporting the immune system, helping the body produce collagen, and assisting with antioxidant protection. When parsley appears fresh and green, it is not merely brightening the plate visually. It is contributing a real nutritional gift. There is something almost poetic in this idea that a garnish can matter. It gently challenges the modern tendency to separate food into main ingredients and extras, as though only large portions deserve attention. Traditional food cultures often understood better that small things, used regularly, shape health over time. A pinch of herbs here, a handful there, repeated across days and seasons, can amount to more than a rare heroic serving of some fashionable superfood. The daily habit matters. The ordinary repetition matters. Nutrition is often built through consistency, not spectacle. And parsley is only one example. Many herbs contain significant levels of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and phytonutrients relative to their size. Basil offers compounds with antioxidant activity. Thyme carries plant chemicals associated with antimicrobial and protective properties. Oregano contains potent aromatic substances and antioxidant compounds. Cilantro, dill, mint, and chives all contribute their own distinctive profiles. Even when eaten in modest amounts, herbs enrich meals not only with taste, but with layers of biological complexity. They are among the quietest ways to make food more alive. This is one reason herbs have long occupied a special place between food and medicine. Long before nutrient charts and laboratory measurements, people sensed that certain plants were strengthening, cleansing, cooling, warming, settling, or restorative. They may not have spoken in the language of vitamins or antioxidants, but they noticed effects. A broth rich with herbs felt more reviving. A sauce heavy with fresh greens seemed brighter and somehow more beneficial. A mint infusion refreshed the mouth and stomach. Parsley was associated in various traditions with cleansing and freshness. Human beings often recognized the value of herbs through experience long before science could explain the mechanisms. Modern nutrition, in many ways, has simply confirmed what older food wisdom suggested. Herbs are concentrated sources of plant chemistry. Their pigments, aromas, and bitterness are clues. Deep green leaves often signal the presence of chlorophyll, carotenoids, vitamin-rich tissues, and other beneficial compounds. Strong scents suggest essential oils and volatile molecules, many of which have antioxidant or antimicrobial significance. Slight bitterness can indicate phytochemicals that stimulate digestion or contribute protective effects. The senses, while not infallible, sometimes offer early hints of nutritional richness. Of course, it is also true that herbs are usually eaten in relatively small quantities. A person is unlikely to consume a giant bowl of rosemary leaves in the way they might eat spinach or lettuce. So we should be careful not to exaggerate. Herbs are not magical substitutes for a balanced diet, nor are they an excuse to ignore broader nutrition. Their strength lies not in bulk, but in concentration and regularity. They work best as enhancers, additions that deepen the nutritional quality of meals already built on wholesome foundations. In that role, they are extraordinary. There is another advantage to herbs that matters just as much as their vitamin content. They help make healthy food more pleasurable. This is no minor thing. A nourishing meal that tastes dull is harder to sustain as a habit. Herbs bring brightness, freshness, complexity, and aroma. They wake up vegetables, elevate grains, soften the heaviness of beans, enliven soups, and transform simple dishes into memorable ones. In doing so, they quietly support better eating patterns overall. Sometimes the nutritional power of an herb lies partly in the way it persuades us to enjoy healthier food more often. Fresh parsley, for example, can bring lift to a heavy stew, clarity to a grain salad, or freshness to roasted potatoes. Mint cools and brightens. Dill adds a delicate grassy sweetness. Cilantro creates sharp, green contrast. Basil brings warmth and softness to tomato-based dishes. Chives contribute mild onion notes without the weight of bulb vegetables. Each herb changes not only flavor, but the whole feeling of a meal. Food becomes lighter, more layered, more interesting, and that may be one of the simplest paths to better nourishment, making good food irresistibly appealing. In recent years, the phrase superfood has often been used to market exotic berries, powders, seeds, and rare ingredients, as though health must always arrive from far away in expensive packaging. Herbs quietly resist this idea. They remind us that nutritional richness is often growing in the most familiar places. In a bunch of parsley at the market, a pot of basil on a windowsill, a handful of mint in the garden, or a few stems of thyme drying in the kitchen. They are humble superfoods if one wants to use the term at all. Not because they are dramatic, but because they offer so much while asking for so little. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson hidden in parsley's small leaves. Great value does not always announce itself in grand forms. Sometimes it comes chopped finely, added at the end, and almost taken for granted. A single spoonful may seem insignificant, but repeated over the years, such gestures become part of how a culture feeds itself well. Herbs teach us that nourishment can be subtle, fragrant, and beautifully modest. So when you next see a fresh green sprinkle of parsley or basil laid over a dish, it may be worth pausing for a second look. What appears to be decoration may also be nutrition. What seems minor may be concentrated. The garnish, in its quiet way, may be doing more than anyone at the table realizes. And from this hidden nutritional richness, our journey now turns toward one of the most famous herbal reputations of all. The idea that certain plants can fight microbes and protect the body like nature's own medicine chest. Few herbs carry that legend more powerfully than garlic. From the soft brightness of parsley and the quiet strength hidden in small green leaves, we now arrive at a plant with a very different personality. One far less delicate, far more forceful, and impossible to ignore. Garlic does not whisper the way parsley does. It announces itself. It clings to the hands, fills the kitchen, lingers on the breath, and transforms the atmosphere of a room the moment it meets heat or pressure. Its scent is sharp, sulfurous, almost wild, and yet across cultures and centuries, people have embraced it with remarkable devotion. Garlic is one of humanity's oldest culinary companions, but it is also one of the most famous medicinal plants in the world, a bulb so potent that it earned a nickname both humble and grand at once, the poor man's antibiotic. That phrase carries a great deal of history. It suggests not only garlic's reputation for fighting illness, but also its accessibility. Unlike rare and costly remedies reserved for elites, garlic was the medicine of ordinary people. Could be grown, stored, traded cheaply, and incorporated into daily food. It belonged to peasants, laborers, village healers, and home kitchens. It was available to those who could not summon an apothecary or afford elaborate treatments. In that sense, garlic's fame is rooted not merely in chemistry, but in democracy. It was one of the great remedies of the common household. What gives garlic this legendary status is a compound called allicin, which is formed when the clove is chopped, crushed, or otherwise damaged. This is an important detail because the fresh intact clove is something like a sealed container of potential. Only when its internal structures are broken do certain compounds meet and react, creating allicin and the powerful aroma that follows. In other words, garlic's medicinal strength is not simply present in a static way. It is released through disruption. The plant, when injured, activates a chemical defense system. What we smell in the kitchen is, in a sense, the scent of the bulb defending itself. That defensive chemistry is part of why garlic has drawn so much attention in traditional medicine and modern research alike. Allicin and related sulfur compounds have been associated with antibacterial and antifungal effects, which helps explain why garlic became so widely respected as a natural protector against infection. Long before people understood microbes scientifically, they noticed outcomes. Certain preparations seemed to help wounds. Certain foods seemed to protect health. Certain strong-smelling plants acquired reputations for cleansing, warding off sickness, or strengthening the body in times of vulnerability. Garlic became one of the most enduring examples of that pattern. Its medicinal legend stretches across civilizations. Ancient Egyptians valued garlic highly enough to feed it to laborers and include it in medical traditions. Greek and Roman cultures associated it with strength, endurance, and protection. In many parts of Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, garlic was used not only for flavor but for colds, respiratory complaints, digestive troubles, and general resilience. Folklore, medicine, and food all converged around this one bulb. It was not unusual for a single household ingredient to occupy several worlds at once. Garlic seasoned the stew, fortified the body, and entered the imagination as something almost magically protective. There is also a psychological reason garlic feels medicinal. Its intensity makes it seem active. A weak flavor rarely inspires confidence as a remedy, but garlic has presence. It burns slightly, bites sharply, and leaves evidence of itself behind. Human beings often trust strong sensory experiences. If a plant is powerful enough to sting the nose and linger for hours, it feels capable of doing something substantial inside the body as well. This is not science, of course, but it helps explain why some herbs acquire especially strong reputations. Garlic feels like a force, and yet its force is not merely imagined. Modern science has indeed found that garlic contains biologically active compounds with notable effects, though as always, the reality is more nuanced than folklore alone suggests. Garlic is not a miracle cure, and it should not be treated as a replacement for proper medical care in serious infections. But its long-standing reputation as a plant with antimicrobial potential is not baseless. The chemistry is real. The effects, while dependent on preparation, dose, and context, are grounded in more than myth. This is often the fascinating middle ground where herbs live, somewhere between exaggerated legend and genuine biological value. Garlic's antifungal reputation is equally striking. Fungi, like bacteria, are part of the invisible world that people feared long before they could see it. Any herb that seemed to check rot, protect food, or assist the body in resisting certain conditions naturally stood out. Garlic's pungent compounds helped place it in that category of household protectors, plants that fought corruption, decay, and unseen threat. In a symbolic sense, garlic came to represent purification. It is perhaps no coincidence that in folklore it later became associated with protection against dark forces, even imaginary ones. A plant already linked to fighting invisible harms could easily be enlisted in the defense against supernatural dangers too. This blending of science and symbolism is one of the reasons garlic is so compelling. Few plants move so seamlessly between kitchen practicality, medicinal respect, and mythic aura. A garlic clove can sit on a cutting board looking almost ordinary, papery, and pale, while carrying within it a chemical drama triggered the moment the knife falls. It is both vegetable and weapon, ingredient and remedy. Its power lies partly in transformation, from intact clove to crushed paste, from mild potential to released activity, from storage bulb to aromatic force. There is another quiet lesson here as well. Garlic reminds us that healing plants are not always gentle in the sentimental sense. Some herbs soothe with soft fragrance or delicate tea. garlic heals or is believed to heal through sharpness, heat, and assertiveness. It belongs to a category of plant allies that work not by calming the senses, but by waking them up. It is medicinal in the way thunder is atmospheric, direct, unmistakable, impossible to overlook. Not all remedies wear the face of comfort. Some arrive with pungency and fire. Even in cooking, garlic's medicinal identity lingers. It is often added not only because it tastes good, but because people intuitively feel it makes food more strengthening, more protective, somehow more alive. A soup with garlic feels more restorative. A broth infused with garlic seems better suited to sickness, cold weather, or recovery. This may not always be measurable in simple ways, but it reflects a deep cultural memory. Across many traditions, garlic is food that behaves like medicine and medicine that easily becomes food. Still, respect is important. Raw garlic can irritate some people. Concentrated supplements are not suitable for everyone. In larger amounts or when combined with certain conditions or medications, garlic can create problems as well as benefits. Like so many herbs, its usefulness does not erase the need for judgment. Nature offers power, but power always asks to be handled wisely. Garlic's commonness can make us forget that it is chemically active. Familiar does not mean weak, and perhaps that is the most enduring wonder of garlic, that something so ordinary, so widely available, and so woven into daily cooking could hold such a formidable reputation. It is the medicine chest hidden in the pantry, the pungent bulb that poor households trusted, the plant whose smell alone seemed to promise defense. In garlic, the line between nourishment and remedy becomes especially thin, and the kitchen begins to feel very much like an ancient pharmacy. From here, our path leads naturally to another legendary herbal compound, one far more golden in color, softer in aroma, but equally celebrated for its healing promise. If garlic is the sharp defender of the herbal world, turmeric may be its glowing source of quiet fire. If garlic is the bold guardian of the herbal world, arriving with sharpness, heat, and a kind of fierce immediacy, then turmeric enters in an entirely different way. It does not strike the senses with the same commanding force. Instead, it glows. Its color alone seems to carry meaning. Deep golden, sun-warmed, almost luminous, as though the root had stored light beneath the soil. Where garlic feels like a blade, turmeric feels like an ember. And for centuries, across kitchens, healing traditions, and spiritual practices, that golden ember has been cherished not only for its beauty and flavor, but for its reputation as one of nature's most remarkable anti-inflammatory plants. Turmeric comes from the rhizome of a tropical plant related to ginger, and like ginger, it grows underground, storing its strength out of sight. When cut open, its flesh reveals that unforgettable orange-yellow hue that has stained pots, cloth, fingers, and ceremonial offerings for generations. In many cultures, turmeric is more than an ingredient. It is a symbol of cleansing, blessing, vitality, and protection. It colors curries, rice, milk, and stews, but it also appears in rituals, skin applications, and traditional remedies. Few herbs or roots move as gracefully as turmeric between the practical, the medicinal, and the sacred. At the heart of turmeric's modern reputation is a compound called curcumin, the bright polyphenol most often associated with its anti-inflammatory effects. In scientific discussions, Curcumin has become almost synonymous with turmeric's healing promise, though the whole root contains a broader community of compounds that contribute to its character. Still, curcumin stands at the center of attention because inflammation, the body's complex response to injury, infection, and imbalance, is now understood to play a role in many chronic conditions. When people speak of turmeric as a natural ally, they are often speaking of its potential to help modulate this inflammatory process. This is where turmeric's legend becomes especially interesting. It is often described as having anti-inflammatory power strong enough to be compared, in broad reputation, to certain modern pain relief drugs such as ibuprofen. Such comparisons are compelling because they place an ancient root beside the products of pharmaceutical science. Yet they must be handled carefully. Turmeric is not literally the same as ibuprofen, nor does it behave in identical ways, doses, or contexts. The comparison is better understood as a reflection of perceived strength and biological significance rather than a simple one-to-one replacement. Still, the fact that such comparisons are made at all shows how seriously turmeric's properties are taken. What makes turmeric especially beloved in traditional use is the sense that it works not through harshness, but through steady support. It is often seen as a gentler helper, something that can be woven into daily life rather than called upon only in moments of acute distress. A spoonful stirred into food, a warm golden drink before rest, a healing broth enriched by its earthy depth, a paste used in old household practices. Turmeric seems to belong to the long rhythm of maintenance, the art of keeping the body balanced before illness fully takes hold. In that way, it represents a style of herbal wisdom deeply rooted in prevention, nourishment, and daily care. Its flavor reflects this character. Turmeric is not sweet, nor is it aggressively spicy in the way chili can be. It is earthy, slightly bitter, warm, and grounding, with a faintly musky quality that seems to belong more to roots, rain, and soil than to bright leaves or sharp seeds. This grounding flavor makes it feel serious, substantial, almost ancient on the tongue. It does not flutter through a dish the way basil or parsley might. It settles into it. It colors everything it touches, visually and sensorially, as though unwilling to remain a minor note. That coloring power may partly explain turmeric's symbolic weight in human culture. Golden pigments naturally suggest sunlight, sanctity, health, and abundance. In South Asia especially, turmeric has long been linked not only to food and healing, but to ceremony, purification, and auspicious beginnings. It marks skin, cloth, and ritual objects with the same radiant stain. It is difficult to separate its medicinal history from its cultural beauty. To many people, turmeric is healing made visible, not an invisible tablet or hidden extract, but a vivid golden substance whose presence can be seen as clearly as it can be tasted. And yet, beneath the cultural richness, there is real biochemical fascination. Curcumin has been studied for its interactions with pathways involved in inflammation and oxidative stress, which helps explain why turmeric continues to draw both scientific and public interest. At the same time, one of the practical challenges with curcumin is that it is not easily absorbed by the body on its own. Traditional culinary wisdom, interestingly, often anticipated part of this problem intuitively. Turmeric is frequently cooked with fat and paired with black pepper, whose compound piperine is widely believed to enhance curcumin absorption. Once again, old food practices and modern biochemical insight seem to meet in the middle, each illuminating the other. This meeting of tradition and science is one of the most compelling things about turmeric. Long before journals, extraction methods, and controlled studies, people had already made space for this root in systems of medicine that valued observation across generations. They noticed that it supported recovery, soothed the body, and belonged naturally to diets meant to sustain health. Science later arrived and asked more precise questions. Which molecules are active? How do they behave? Under what conditions do they work best? The root remained the same, but the language around it expanded. Turmeric also reveals something important about herbal medicine more broadly. Not all powerful plants announce their strength through bitterness or pungency alone. Garlic feels medicinal because it shocks the senses. Turmeric, by contrast, can feel medicinal because it warms, settles, and steadies. Its power is less theatrical, more glowing than explosive. It invites trust through repetition. A person may not notice its gifts in one dramatic moment, but through continued use, it becomes associated with resilience, comfort, and care. It is the kind of herb that seems to ask not for urgency, but for relationship. Of course, as with all herbs, balance matters. Turmeric is not automatically suitable in every quantity, form, or medical circumstance. Highly concentrated supplements are not the same as culinary use, and not everyone responds to them in the same way. Herbal tradition can offer wisdom, but wisdom includes caution. The gentleness often associated with turmeric should not be confused with absolute harmlessness. Its very popularity is a reminder that even beloved roots deserve respect. Still, it is easy to understand why turmeric holds such an enduring place in the herbal imagination. It brings together color, nourishment, medicine, ritual, and daily habit in one earthy rhizome. It is both kitchen ingredient and healing symbol, both spice and remedy, both ancient household staple and modern research subject. In turmeric, the old herbal promise of quiet, plant-based support takes on a golden form, warming the body while carrying the memory of centuries. And now, after meeting garlic the defender and turmeric the golden healer, our path turns from what herbs do for the body toward how they are best used in the kitchen itself. For even the most beneficial herb can lose some of its magic if added at the wrong time. The next lesson is a practical one, but no less elegant. The golden rule of cooking with herbs. After exploring the healing reputations of garlic and turmeric, it feels only natural to step back into the kitchen, where herbs reveal one of their simplest and most elegant lessons: timing matters. A herb is not only defined by what it is, but by when it enters the dish. The same leaf can taste bright or dull, fragrant or flat, depending on the moment it is added. This is one of the quiet arts of cooking, and it is often learned not from a recipe card alone, but from repetition, scent, and attention. Knowing when to add herbs is a kind of culinary wisdom that can make the difference between a dish that merely contains herbs and a dish that truly lets them live. The golden rule is both practical and beautifully intuitive. Fresh herbs with soft leaves are usually best added near the end of cooking, or even after the heat has been turned off. Dried herbs, especially those from woody plants, are often better added earlier, so their flavors have time to open, soften, and weave themselves into the dish. It is such a small distinction on paper, and yet it changes everything. To understand why, we need only remember what herbs are made of. Their scents and flavors come largely from volatile aromatic compounds, oils and plant chemicals that can evaporate, transform, or fade when exposed to too much heat for too long. Soft, fresh herbs such as basil, parsley, cilantro, dill, chives, or mint are especially delicate in this regard. Their freshness is part of their identity. Their character lives close to the surface, in bright green tissues and fragile aromatic notes that are easily bruised by overcooking. If they are dropped into a boiling pot too early, much of what makes them vivid may drift away into the air or collapse into a vague green background. That is why a handful of chopped basil folded into a sauce at the last moment feels alive in a way early added basil often does not. The scent rises immediately. The dish seems to wake up. Parsley scattered over soup or roasted vegetables retains its freshness and subtle bitterness. Cilantro added at the end keeps its sharp, citrusy brightness. Mint stirred gently into warm food after cooking preserves its cooling lift. These herbs are not meant to endure prolonged heat. They are meant to arrive like a final breath of air through an open window. There is something almost musical about this. Fresh herbs play the high notes. They brighten, sharpen, and finish. They do not want to be buried deep in the long middle of cooking, where their delicate tones may be muted. Instead, they come at the end, when the dish is nearly complete and ready to receive a little brightness, complexity, or contrast. To add a soft herb at the final moment is not simply to season. It is to compose. Dried herbs, on the other hand, tell a different story. They have already been through a transformation. Their moisture has been removed, their tissues concentrated, and their flavors altered into a more stable, often deeper form. Many dried herbs also come from woody, resilient plants such as rosemary, thyme, oregano, marjoram, and sage. These herbs are naturally tougher in structure and often richer in compounds that can withstand and even benefit from long cooking. Their flavors are not at their best when left sitting on the surface. They need time to reawaken. When dried thyme or oregano enters a pot of soup, stew, or sauce early in the cooking process, the heat and moisture begin to coax its stored character back into motion. The leaves soften, the oils disperse slowly, the flavor infuses the liquid, moves through fat, and settles into the broader architecture of the dish. What begins as a dry, quiet pinch becomes something much larger, not by remaining distinct, but by merging. These herbs are the low notes, the structural tones, the ones that support rather than flash. They do not need a dramatic entrance. They need time. Woody fresh herbs often behave more like dried herbs than like soft fresh herbs, which adds another layer of nuance. Fresh rosemary, fresh thyme, and fresh sage can often be added earlier in cooking because their leaves are tougher and their aromas are more resilient. A rosemary sprig simmered in a soup or stew releases its pine-like depth gradually. Fresh thyme can hold up beautifully in braises. Sage leaves fried briefly in butter or infused into rich dishes transform through heat rather than lose themselves entirely. So the most useful distinction is not simply fresh versus dried, but delicate versus sturdy. Still, as a guiding rule, fresh soft herbs late, dried woody herbs early remains a wonderfully reliable principle. It helps the cook respect the nature of the plant instead of forcing all herbs to behave the same way. Not every leaf wants the same treatment. Some are finishers, some are foundations, some are best bruised and stirred in. Some are best simmered and forgotten until their presence quietly reveals itself in every spoonful. This idea also reflects a deeper truth about herbs more broadly. They reward attention. A dish seasoned lazily may still be edible, but herbs respond generously to care. Chopping basil just before serving. Rubbing dried oregano between the fingers to awaken its scent before adding it to hot oil. Sliding bay, thyme, or rosemary into a simmering pot and removing the stems later. Letting dill or parsley remain bright and green instead of sacrificing them to unnecessary boiling. These are not difficult acts, but they turn cooking into a closer relationship with the plant itself. The difference becomes especially clear in simple foods. In a long-simmered tomato sauce, dried oregano added early can deepen the base beautifully, while fresh basil added at the end restores lift and fragrance. In soup, dried thyme may build warmth through the broth, while chopped parsley at serving gives the bowl freshness and color. In roasted vegetables, rosemary can perfume from the beginning, while mint or dill might be added after cooking for contrast. In this way, herbs can work together across time, some building the body of flavor and others delivering the final spark. There is also a practical tenderness in this rule because it prevents waste. Fresh herbs are precious in their own way, often vibrant, short-lived, and easily bruised. To throw them into a pot too early is to ask them to be something they are not. Dried herbs, meanwhile, have already survived harvesting and drying, and their whole nature has shifted toward endurance. Cooking wisely with herbs means honoring those differences instead of flattening them. Perhaps that is why the timing of herbs feels like more than a kitchen trick. It becomes a small lesson in sensitivity. Some things are meant to be transformed slowly by heat and patience. Others are meant to remain bright, fresh, and nearly untouched. Good cooking knows the difference. It does not merely add ingredients, it listens to them. So the next time you cook, you might picture herbs not as a single category, but as different kinds of voices waiting for their moment. Thyme and oregano may want to enter early and settle into the background like warm architecture. Basil and parsley may want to arrive late and shine. Mint may want only the gentlest heat. Rosemary may prefer time and strength. Once you begin to think this way, herbs stop being decoration or habit and become living participants in the rhythm of a meal. And from the kitchen's quiet laws of timing, our path now turns toward another kind of herbal influence altogether, not on the stew or broth, but on the mind and nervous system. For some herbs do more than flavor food. Their scent alone seems capable of changing the atmosphere of the body. Few examples are more beloved or more gentle than lavender. From the warmth of the kitchen and the careful timing of herbs in food, we now move into a quieter realm, one where a plant may do its work without ever being eaten at all. There are herbs whose influence begins the moment their scent enters the air, before they touch the tongue, before they steep in water, before they become medicine in any formal sense. They seem to reach us through the breath itself. And among all such herbs, few have acquired a reputation as soothing, graceful, and beloved as lavender. Lavender is one of those rare plants that feels calm even before we know anything about it. Its soft purple flowers, pale green-gray leaves, and unmistakable fragrance seem to carry an atmosphere of peace wherever they appear. A room with lavender in it feels different. A pillow scented with lavender feels gentler. A garden lined with its silvery stems seems to invite slower footsteps and quieter thoughts. Long before modern studies began measuring its effects, people had already sensed that lavender belonged to rest, care, and the easing of inner tension. Part of this comes from fragrance itself, which is more powerful than we often realize. Scent bypasses many of the slower, more analytical pathways through which we understand the world. It reaches into memory, emotion, and bodily response with startling immediacy. A smell can change mood before a thought is fully formed. It can bring back childhood, grief, safety, longing, or relief in an instant. Lavender works in this intimate territory where the mind and body are less separate than we sometimes pretend. Its aroma is not merely pleasant. It is regulating. This is why lavender has become one of the most studied herbs in relation to calm and sleep. Its scent has been associated with reductions in heart rate, lower blood pressure, and a gentler settling of the nervous system. In other words, lavender does not simply smell relaxing because culture told us so. The body itself appears to respond. The pulse slows, tension softens, breathing may become a little easier, a little deeper. Stress seems to loosen its grip. These changes are subtle, of course, but subtle changes in the body can shape an entire evening. A person does not need to be dramatically sedated to benefit from calm. Sometimes a small downward shift in internal intensity is enough to make rest possible. There is something beautiful in the fact that lavender helps through atmosphere. It does not arrive with the assertive pungency of garlic or the earthy gravity of turmeric. It does not demand attention. It offers an environment. To sit near lavender is to feel the edges of a room soften. To inhale it in warm steam on clean linen or in evening air is to feel the day lose some of its sharpness. Its medicine, if we may call it that, often lies in making the body feel safe enough to let go. This may explain why lavender appears so often in rituals of transition. Bedtime, bathing, recovery, quiet prayer, convalescence, moments of emotional overwhelm, and the small domestic acts that prepare the body for peace. Lavender sachets tucked into drawers, oils diffused in rooms, dried bundles hung by windows, warm baths infused with its fragrance. All of these practices reflect an old human understanding that healing is not only about intervention, but about conditions. Rest needs a setting. Sleep needs an invitation. Calm often needs help arriving. And lavender is particularly skilled at invitation. Its floral scent is unlike the sweetness of many decorative flowers. It is drier, cleaner, more herbal, with something almost airy and medicinal beneath the softness. That dryness matters, keeps lavender from becoming cloying or heavy. It soothes without smothering. It is floral enough to comfort, herbal enough to steady. This balance may be part of why so many people find it trustworthy. It feels gentle but not weak, tender but not childish, restful but still clear. The science behind lavender's effects continues to be explored, yet even without diving too deeply into chemistry, one truth remains clear. Human beings repeatedly return to lavender when they are seeking calm. That cultural persistence matters. A plant does not become globally associated with sleep and relaxation by accident alone. Repeated generations noticed something. A grandmother placed lavender near the bed because it helped. A healer recommended it in times of agitation. A weary person found comfort in its scent and remembered. These experiences accumulate. Tradition, at its best, is often memory refined by repetition. There is also a lesson here about the nature of herbal support. Not every medicinal effect is dramatic. Some of the most valuable herbal influences are environmental rather than forceful. Lavender does not typically knock a person out in the way a strong sedative might. Instead, it creates a gentler internal climate in which sleep becomes more likely. It does not erase the mind, but quiets it. It does not overpower stress so much as reduce the body's readiness to remain on high alert. In a world where so many people live in constant stimulation, that kind of subtle assistance can feel almost miraculous. The connection between scent and sleep is especially meaningful because sleep itself is not something we can command directly. The harder people chase it, the more it often recedes. Rest arrives best through softening conditions. Dim light, safety, warmth, stillness, familiar sounds, steady breathing. Lavender fits naturally into this constellation. It becomes one more signal to the body that the night is no longer asking for vigilance. The labor of the day can loosen. The threshold of sleep is near. Of course, lavender is not a cure-all, and its gentleness should not be mistaken for universal effectiveness in every circumstance. Severe insomnia, anxiety disorders, or cardiovascular issues are more complex than a pleasant fragrance can solve. Yet this does not diminish lavender's value. Not everything helpful must be total to be real. A plant that lowers tension even slightly, that helps one person fall asleep more easily, that makes a room feel safer or a breath feel deeper, is already doing something meaningful. Lavender also reminds us that herbs can work through beauty. Modern thinking often separates usefulness from loveliness, as though one belongs to science and the other to art. Lavender refuses that division. Its healing presence is inseparable from its elegance. The same herb that steadies the body also pleases the eye, perfumes the linen, and turns a patch of dry soil into a field of violet calm. It heals not only by chemistry, but by mood, environment, and the subtle reassurance of order and fragrance. Perhaps that is why lavender has become almost symbolic of peace itself. To speak of it is to imagine twilight, quiet rooms, folded blankets, warm baths, and the long exhale at the end of an exhausting day. It has become one of the herbal world's gentlest promises, that the body can return from strain, that the heart can slow, that sleep can be invited rather than forced. And from this fragrant herb of rest, our journey now turns toward another plant whose gifts are less airy but no less beloved. A plant known for soothing burns, supporting healing, and caring for the skin directly. If lavender calms through the breath and the nervous system, aloe vera works closer to the surface, where the body meets the world. From the airy calm of lavender and its quiet influence on the nervous system, we now move toward a very different kind of herbal comfort, one that is cool, immediate, and felt directly on the skin. If lavender belongs to the breath, the pillow, and the soft descent into rest, aloe vera belongs to the surface of the body, to heat, irritation, tenderness, and recovery. It is one of the most recognizable healing plants in the world, and perhaps one of the easiest to love, because its usefulness is so tangible. A leaf is cut, and there it is, clear gel, cool to the touch, soothing almost at once. Few herbs make their purpose feel so direct. Aloe vera has a certain visual honesty about it. Its thick, fleshy leaves suggest storage, resilience, and self-protection. This is a plant built for difficult conditions, for dry climates and harsh sun, carrying its moisture within itself like a private reserve. When we break open one of those leaves, we encounter a substance that feels almost miraculous in its simplicity. Translucent, slippery, cooling, and gentle. It is easy to understand why so many households keep aloe nearby, whether growing in a pot by a bright window or bottled as gel in a cabinet. It has become one of the great first response plants of ordinary life. Most people know aloe vera first as a remedy for minor burns, especially sunburn. The reason is almost experiential before it is scientific. Burned skin radiates heat, tightness, and discomfort. Aloe meets that state with the opposite qualities: coolness, moisture, and softness. It seems to take the body's distress and answer it in the same language. Where the skin feels inflamed, aloe feels calming. Where the tissue feels dry and stretched, aloe feels hydrating. Where there is redness and fragility, aloe provides a temporary veil of relief. Even before one speaks of compounds and mechanisms, the sensory relationship makes sense. But aloe vera's reputation goes beyond simple soothing. The gel inside the leaf contains polysaccharides and other biologically active substances that have long drawn attention for their role in supporting wound healing, moisture retention, and skin repair. These compounds help explain why aloe is associated not only with comfort, but with recovery. It does not merely cool the skin in the moment. It has been valued because it seems to encourage the skin to restore itself. In particular, its relationship to collagen-related healing and tissue support has made it a favorite in both traditional care and modern skincare. There is something deeply fitting in this. Skin is the boundary between the body and the world. It takes the insult of sun, wind, friction, dryness, heat, and injury more directly than any other organ we see. To care for the skin is, in a way, to care for the body's threshold. Aloe is one of the herbs most closely associated with that threshold work. It is protective without being heavy, active without being harsh, medicinal without feeling severe. It belongs to those forms of healing that comfort first and then quietly support the body's own intelligence. This quiet support is part of aloe's charm. It does not usually come wrapped in the drama of strong flavor or fragrance. Unlike garlic or lavender, aloe does not announce itself through the air. Its power is in texture, contact, and touch. It works through coolness spread gently over irritation, through moisture held against dryness, through the sense that something raw has finally been met with kindness. There is an almost emotional dimension to this kind of care. Burned or damaged skin often feels exposed, vulnerable, overreactive. Aloe responds not with force, but with tenderness. That tenderness has made aloe a staple not only in first aid traditions, but in beauty and skincare culture. Moisturizers, masks, after-sun products, soothing gels, and healing creams often turn to aloe because it offers a rare balance. It is associated with hydration, calmness, and support for repair, all without seeming overly aggressive. In the language of skincare, that matters immensely. People do not want every product to feel like intervention. Often, they want reassurance. Aloe has built its reputation on being the plant of reassurance. And yet, as with many beloved herbs, its widespread use has sometimes flattened the richness of its story. Aloe is not only a cosmetic ingredient or a household trick for sunburn. It is part of a much longer human relationship with medicinal plants, one in which succulents, gels, and stored plant fluids were recognized as useful responses to dryness, heat, and injury. In arid landscapes especially, A plant that carries its own reservoir of soothing moisture would have seemed especially remarkable. Aloe does not merely grow in heat, it offers relief from heat. That almost feels like a botanical act of generosity. Its inner gel also reflects one of the broader truths of herbal medicine. Plants often develop compounds for their own protection that later become useful to us. Aloe stores water and protective substances to survive harsh conditions. Humans discovered that these same internal resources can help damaged skin recover. Once again, the herb's original purpose was not to serve us, and yet through attention we entered into relationship with it. Herbal knowledge so often begins this way, by noticing what helps the plant survive, and then recognizing an echo of that help in ourselves. There is also an elegance in aloe's simplicity. Many remedies require mixing, steeping, drying, powdering, or combining. Aloe, by contrast, can be used in a form very close to how it exists in the leaf. This immediacy gives it a sense of purity in the imagination. Cut leaf, clear gel, direct application. It feels elemental, almost ancient in its straightforwardness. No wonder it inspires trust. The body often responds warmly to things that seem both natural and immediate. Still, aloe deserves the same respectful caution as any other herb. Not every preparation is identical, and not every part of the plant is used the same way. The soothing gel is different from other substances nearer the leaf's outer tissues, and internal use of aloe products is a separate matter from skincare. The popularity of aloe can make it seem universally simple, but even the most familiar plants have complexities. Wise herbal use always includes knowing which part is used, how it is prepared, and for what purpose. Even so, its place in the herbal world is secure. Aloe vera has become almost synonymous with healing skin, and for good reason. It brings together immediate comfort and deeper repair, ancient household wisdom and modern cosmetic science, botanical resilience and human tenderness. It is a plant of stored water, stored calm, stored recovery. When the body feels scorched, scraped, irritated, or worn, aloe seems to offer what the skin longs for most: coolness, moisture, and time to mend. And perhaps that is the quiet beauty of aloe vera. It reminds us that healing is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is clear, cool, and nearly transparent. Sometimes it looks like a thin layer of gel spread over damaged skin. Sometimes the most merciful remedies are the ones that do not demand attention, but simply make pain less loud and repair more possible. From this healer of the skin, our path now turns toward a different kind of domestic herbal magic. Not relief for burns, but protection for the home itself. For some herbs do not soothe the body directly so much as shape the environment around it, keeping away one of the world's oldest and most irritating companions: insects. From the cool healing gel of aloe vera, we now step back into the wider space of the home, where herbs perform another kind of quiet service, not by entering the body, but by shaping the environment around it. Long before chemical sprays, electric diffusers, sealed screens, and supermarket repellents, people noticed that certain plants seemed to make a place less welcoming to insects. A doorway felt calmer. A window corner seemed less troubled by buzzing. A sleeping area became easier to rest in. These observations may have begun simply through repeated household experience, but over time they formed one of the most practical branches of herbal knowledge: the use of fragrant plants as natural protectors of domestic space. Among the most famous examples is citronella grass, often associated with repelling mosquitoes. In some everyday conversations, it is loosely grouped with herbs used around the house, even though botanically it is a grass rather than a tender kitchen herb. Still, in the world of practical plant use, such distinctions matter less than the role it plays. Citronella belongs to a family of aromatic plants whose oils produce a strong, bright, lemon-like scent. To human beings, that scent can feel fresh, clean, and pleasantly sharp. To mosquitoes, it appears considerably less inviting. This is one of those elegant cases where what pleases one creature discourages another. Lavender, too, which we have already met as a herb of calm and sleep, carries a second identity in the household. It may help deter certain insects while making rooms smell beautifully serene. This dual role is part of what makes herbs so beloved. They rarely perform only one task. A lavender bundle can scent linen, ease the mood, beautify a room, and at the same time make the environment less attractive to pests. In the herbal world, usefulness often comes layered rather than singular. A plant enters the home not as a one-purpose tool, but as a quiet companion with several gifts. There is something deeply human about using plants this way. Insects have always been among our most persistent adversaries. Not grand enough to inspire epic tales perhaps, but intimate enough to affect daily comfort in profound ways. Mosquitoes in particular have haunted summer evenings, wetlands, rural homes, and sleeping spaces for countless generations. They interrupt rest, irritate the skin, and, in many parts of the world, carry far more serious risks than mere annoyance. It is no surprise, then, that people have long searched for ways to keep them at bay. Herbs offered one of the gentlest and most accessible methods. The logic behind this is rooted in plant chemistry. Many aromatic plants produce volatile oils as part of their own survival strategies. These compounds may deter herbivores, interfere with insect behavior, or protect the plant from microbial threats. What we experience as fragrance is, from the plant's point of view, often a form of defense or communication. Citronella's bright scent and lavender's floral dryness are not designed for our comfort, and yet they can become useful to us precisely because they affect the tiny creatures sharing our environment. This recurring theme appears again and again in herbal history. Plants evolved for themselves, but attentive humans learned how their defenses could become our allies. There is also an important emotional dimension to herbal insect control. Chemical repellents may be effective, but they can feel harsh, synthetic, or unpleasant in enclosed living spaces. A home filled with aggressive spray does not feel especially restful. By contrast, growing or placing fragrant plants near windows, doors, balconies, or sitting areas allows protection to arrive with beauty. A pot of lavender by a sunny threshold, a citronella grass plant near a patio, a bunch of dried herbs near an entryway. These practices transform defense into atmosphere. The house does not merely resist insects. It becomes more alive, more scented, more welcoming to human senses at the same time. This does not mean herbs are magical shields. A pot of citronella grass alone will not create an invisible force field around an entire home, especially in areas with heavy mosquito populations. Natural methods are often partial, supportive, and best understood as part of a broader strategy rather than complete solutions. Still, partial help matters. A plant that reduces nuisance, improves comfort, and adds fragrance without harsh chemical residue is already valuable. Herbal wisdom often lives in this space of modest but meaningful benefit. And modesty, in truth, is one of the great strengths of household herbs. They do not promise domination. They offer influence. They alter the atmosphere. They shift the balance of a place just enough to make it friendlier for us and less desirable for pests. In that way, they reflect a broader herbal philosophy. Rather than forcing the world entirely into submission, they help us collaborate with natural processes and chemistries already present in living things. Citronella grass is especially interesting because its reputation has spread globally, to the point that many people know it through candles, oils, and outdoor products, even if they have never seen the living plant. Yet there is something quietly satisfying about encountering it in actual growth. Blades arching upward, green and ordinary looking until touched or bruised, when the sharp citrus scent reveals its hidden strength. It reminds us that herbal power is often invisible until activated. The plant looks simple, but the chemistry waits inside. Lavender offers a contrasting beauty, where citronella feels bright, brisk, and practical. Lavender feels graceful and domestic. Its insect-repelling usefulness is almost secondary to its ability to make a home feel calm, clean, and cared for. That combination may be why it has remained so beloved in drawers, linen cupboards, sleeping spaces, and entryways. It helps protect while also creating the sense that a household has been gently tended. Herbal protection, in this case, becomes inseparable from homemaking itself. The broader lesson is that herbs extend the idea of medicine beyond the body. A healthier life is not only about what we swallow or apply to the skin. It is also about the spaces we inhabit. A room that smells pleasant, feels calm, and is less troubled by biting insects contributes to well-being in its own quiet way. Herbal household use reminds us that care can be environmental as much as internal. To place certain plants in and around the home is to shape the conditions of daily life, the air, the mood, the comfort of evenings, the ease of sleep. In many ways, these practices reconnect the home to the garden. Modern life often separates indoors from outdoors, remedy from decoration, usefulness from beauty. Herbs blur those lines. A plant on the windowsill can be ornament, fragrance, mild pest deterrent, and symbolic sign of care all at once. A balcony herb pot can become part of the household's defensive boundary, but in the gentlest imaginable form, green, rooted, quietly growing. Perhaps that is why herbal household traditions feel so enduring. They restore a sense that living with plants is not merely aesthetic, but practical in the oldest sense of the word. Plants do things. They scent, soothe, season, calm, and sometimes protect. Their presence alters the human environment in ways both visible and invisible. To keep herbs near the home is to invite those subtle changes into daily life. And from these domestic protectors, our journey now turns back outward toward the soil and sunlight that shape herbs from the beginning. For some of the most fragrant herbs become strongest not when pampered, but when challenged. The next truth is one gardeners know well. A little hardship can make an herb far more aromatic. From the herb pots placed around windows and doorways to guard the home, we now step outward again into the garden itself, where the deeper personality of herbs is shaped not by decoration or household use, but by sun, wind, dryness, and soil. It is here that one of the most intriguing truths about aromatic plants reveals itself. Sometimes, the conditions that seem a little harsh are the very ones that make an herb most fragrant. This may sound almost paradoxical at first. We often assume that a plant given the richest soil, the most water, and the gentlest treatment will be the healthiest and therefore the best. But many herbs quietly challenge that assumption. In their case, comfort does not always produce character. Rosemary is a perfect example. With its narrow needle-like leaves and resinous scent, rosemary seems to carry the memory of rocky hillsides and hot Mediterranean air. It is not a plant that belongs naturally to lush, heavy, wet soil. It prefers drainage, warmth, and space for its roots to search rather than drown. When rosemary grows under slightly lean conditions, where the earth is not especially rich and moisture does not linger too long, it often develops a stronger aroma, a denser concentration of essential oils, and a more pronounced character. The plant, in other words, seems to become more fully itself under a little restraint. Lavender behaves in much the same way. Anyone who has seen lavender thriving in dry, sunlit ground may have sensed that this is a plant shaped by endurance rather than indulgence. Its silvery leaves, woody base, and floral spikes suggest a life adapted to bright exposure and limited excess. Give lavender too much richness, too much water, or soil that stays overly moist, and it may grow soft, floppy, or less intensely scented. But place it where the sun is strong and the soil relatively poor, and suddenly it becomes concentrated, compact, aromatic, and almost glowing with its own identity. What appears to be difficulty becomes, for the plant, a form of refinement. This is not because herbs enjoy suffering in any sentimental sense. Plants do not romanticize hardship. Rather, many aromatic herbs have evolved to respond to challenging environments by producing more of the compounds that help them survive. Essential oils can serve as protective tools. They may reduce water loss, deter herbivores, defend against microbes, or help the plant cope with environmental stress. So when a rosemary bush or lavender plant grows in dry, lean conditions, it often increases the very chemistry that humans later prize as fragrance, flavor, and medicinal value. What we interpret as a richer scent is, from the plant's perspective, part of a survival strategy. This is one of the most fascinating patterns in herbal life. Adversity can deepen expression. A herb grown too luxuriously may become large but bland, leafy but diluted. A herb grown with a little more challenge often becomes smaller perhaps, but more concentrated. Gardeners have long noticed this. A basil plant overfed with nitrogen may look lush and beautiful, but its flavor can become watery or less intense. Oregano grown in hot sun often tastes stronger. Thyme planted in dry, stony soil can develop astonishing depth for such tiny leaves. The lesson appears again and again. Herbs are not always improved by abundance. They are often clarified by limitation. There is something almost philosophical in this. The plant world reminds us that growth and richness are not identical. Bigger is not always better. More comfort is not always more essence. Character sometimes emerges where resources are not overwhelming, where the plant must work a little harder, defend itself a little more actively, and concentrate its life into stronger forms. In herbs, this becomes visible to us through scent. A dry hillside may smell more powerfully of thyme and rosemary than a fertile valley ever could. And yet, balance remains essential. Too much hardship will kill a plant or stunt it beyond usefulness. The goal is not deprivation, but suitability. A herb should be placed where its natural adaptations are respected. Mediterranean herbs are often happiest in full sun, with excellent drainage and soil that is not overly rich. They need enough water to establish and survive, but not so much that their roots remain wet and their aromatic chemistry dulls. In this sense, good herb growing is less about giving the plant everything and more about understanding what kind of life it was designed for. This understanding helps explain why herb gardens often thrive in places that might seem modest or even difficult by conventional gardening standards. A sunny balcony, a gravelly border, a raised bed with lean soil, a terracotta pot that dries between waterings. These can be ideal homes for rosemary, lavender, thyme, sage, and oregano. Such herbs are not offended by simplicity. In fact, simplicity may bring out their best. Their leaves become firmer, their oils intensify, their scent rises more readily in the warmth. The garden becomes not lush in the tropical sense, but vivid in a drier, more concentrated way. There is also a sensory joy in this kind of gardening. To brush against rosemary growing in sun-baked soil is to release a perfume that feels almost distilled by summer itself. To stand near lavender at the height of a dry afternoon is to inhale something both floral and mineral, as though the sunlight has entered the plant's oils. These fragrances are not accidental luxuries. They are the botanical result of adaptation, and they make the herb garden one of the most intimate classrooms in natural chemistry. The gardener learns not only to water and prune, but to read the relationship between stress and scent. This principle extends beyond fragrance into culinary quality as well. Many cooks know instinctively that herbs grown slowly and under suitable restraint often taste more vivid. A rosemary sprig from a hardier plant can perfume an entire dish. A few leaves of strong thyme may be enough where handfuls of weaker growth would disappoint. Concentration matters in the kitchen just as it does in perfumery and medicine. The herb does not need to be large to be powerful. In fact, its power may increase precisely when its growth is disciplined by the environment. In the modern world, where abundance and optimization are so often pursued without question, herbs offer a small correction. They remind us that life has different models of flourishing. Some things bloom best when lavishly fed. Others discover their finest expression under simpler conditions. To care well for a herb is not always to pamper it, but to understand its native logic. Give lavender poor enough soil to stay honest. Give rosemary drainage enough to breathe. Give thyme stones and sun. Let them feel just enough challenge to become aromatic, resilient, and true. Perhaps that is why herb gardens can feel so strangely wise. They reward the gardener who observes rather than overwhelms. They ask for attention instead of excess. And in return, they offer one of the most satisfying lessons in all of gardening: that a little hardship, properly matched to the plant, can deepen beauty rather than diminish it. From these dry, fragrant beds of rosemary and lavender, our journey now turns toward a plant whose value is measured not by a few leaves or a modest pot, but by extraordinary labor, rarity, and astonishing price. For among all herbs and spices, one stands apart in golden red threads as the most precious of them all: saffron. From the dry hillsides that sharpen the fragrance of rosemary and lavender, we now arrive at a plant whose value is measured not by the size of its leaves, the weight of its stems, or the ease of its cultivation, but by an almost unbelievable degree of delicacy and labor. If many herbs teach us that small things can carry great power, saffron teaches the lesson in its most extravagant form. Here, value is condensed into threads, thin, crimson strands so light they barely seem to weigh anything at all, and yet so prized that they have long been counted among the most expensive plant products on earth. Saffron comes from the flower of Crocus sativus, often called the saffron crocus. Unlike the leafy herbs we have met so far, this is not a plant chiefly valued for its foliage or even for its petals. Its treasure lies in the flower's stigmas, the vivid red structures at the center, delicate as filaments and astonishingly easy to damage. Each flower produces only 3 of these precious threads. 3. That fact alone begins to explain saffron's cost. But the full story becomes even more remarkable when one imagines the scale of labor involved. To produce a substantial quantity of saffron, an immense number of flowers must be grown, harvested, and processed by hand. Roughly 150,000 flowers may be needed to yield a single kilogram of dried saffron. When you pause over that number, the world seems to slow. 150,000 blossoms opening briefly, each one requiring attention, each one holding only a tiny portion of the final harvest. This is not abundance in the ordinary agricultural sense. It is accumulation by devotion. A field of saffron is not merely cultivated land. It is a place where patience is made visible. The harvest itself is famously delicate. The flowers bloom for a short window, and they must be gathered at the right time, often early in the day, before the blossoms become damaged by sun, wind, or handling. Then the crimson stigmas are carefully separated from the rest of the flower, usually by hand. There is no brutal efficiency to this process. No machine can fully replace the sensitivity required. Human fingers, human eyes, human patience, these remain central. The work is repetitive, precise, and time-consuming, the very opposite of industrial speed. Saffron carries the imprint of labor in a way few plant products do. This is one reason saffron feels almost ceremonial even when used in cooking. A tiny pinch is enough to color and perfume an entire dish. Its power lies not in bulk but in concentration, much like the herbs we have already encountered, though saffron takes that principle to an extraordinary extreme. The threads release a golden hue and a scent that is difficult to compare directly to anything else. Warm, hay-like, floral, slightly metallic, a little earthy, and strangely luminous. Its flavor does not shout, but it transforms. Rice becomes radiant. Broth becomes more fragrant, more mysterious. A dessert seems suddenly touched by something both delicate and luxurious. This luxury is not merely cultural invention. It emerges from the plant's biology and the labor it demands. Because so much human work yields so little physical weight, saffron naturally became valuable in trade. It was treasured not only for flavor and color, but for rarity. To own it, gift it, or cook with it signaled access to something costly in effort as much as money. Like silk, incense, or fine resins, saffron acquired a symbolic weight that went beyond practical function. It became a marker of refinement, wealth, sacredness, and care. And yet saffron also remains rooted in the soil, in flower fields and seasonal rhythms, which makes its expense feel almost tender rather than purely extravagant. It is not expensive because it is artificial or technologically complex. It is expensive because it asks so much from nature and from human hands. There is something strangely humbling in that. Modern culture often associates high value with speed, scale, or rarity created by brand and market. Saffron represents a much older form of value, the preciousness of what cannot be hurried. Its history is correspondingly rich. Across regions of the Mediterranean, the Middle East, South Asia, and beyond, saffron has been woven into cooking, medicine, dyeing, ceremony, and trade. It colored royal garments and sacred foods. It entered healing traditions as a substance associated with vitality, mood, and warmth. It traveled long distances, linking growers, merchants, cooks, healers, and elites across time. Few plant products move so easily between field, pharmacy, temple, and banquet. In saffron, the worlds of herb, spice, medicine, and luxury become almost inseparable. There is also a certain emotional power in saffron's color. Those red threads, when infused, become gold. This transformation feels symbolic even before we assign meaning to it. A tiny amount of dark crimson matter changes water, milk, or broth into something sunlit. It is easy to see why cultures associated saffron with radiance, celebration, and preciousness. The plant seems to perform alchemy on a domestic scale. A cook drops in a few threads, waits, and watches ordinary liquid become luminous. That visual magic is part of saffron's enduring appeal. At the same time, saffron teaches a useful lesson about proportion. Because it is so concentrated, it asks for restraint. Too little and its character may barely emerge. Too much and it can become overpowering or wasteful. It is an ingredient that encourages reverence. One does not toss saffron carelessly. One steeps it, coaxes it, measures it lightly, allows it to unfold. In that sense, saffron transforms not only food, but the cook's behavior. It demands slowness and attention, much as its cultivation does. This makes saffron a kind of mirror for the herbal world as a whole. Many herbs ask us to notice that potency does not depend on size. Saffron elevates that truth into something almost absolute. Here, the most precious part of the plant is nearly weightless. Here, the costliest harvest is made of threads. Here, what changes the dish most dramatically may be all but invisible in quantity. It is the final triumph of concentration over scale. Of course, saffron's high price has also made it vulnerable to imitation and fraud. Throughout history, precious goods attract substitutes. Threads may be adulterated, powders diluted, color exaggerated. This too is part of saffron's story. When something is rare and labor-intensive, authenticity becomes part of its value. To know real saffron is to know not only its appearance and aroma, but the field, flower, and human care from which it came. Genuine saffron is expensive because truth itself has a cost in this case. Still, beyond all commerce and prestige, saffron remains a flower's gift, fragile stigmas gathered one blossom at a time. That may be the most beautiful thing about it. Beneath the language of luxury lies a botanical intimacy. Someone had to bend over a flower. Someone had to separate thread from petal. Someone had to preserve those tiny red strands so that months later and perhaps far away, another person could dissolve them into warmth, color, and fragrance. In that chain of care, saffron becomes more than an ingredient. It becomes a story of attention stretched across distance. And from this most precious of herbs and spices, our journey now moves toward a different kind of value, not economic, but symbolic. For herbs have not only flavored meals and soothed wounds, they have also carried messages, emotions, and hidden meanings. In the next chapter, we step into a world where a simple sprig could speak volumes without a single word being said. From saffron's fields of delicate labor and extraordinary value, we now step into another hidden life of herbs, one not measured in medicine, nutrition, or price, but in meaning. For there was a time when plants were not only grown, gathered, or prescribed, they were also read. A sprig, a flower, a small bundled leaf could act almost like a sentence, carrying emotion from one person to another in silence. In this world, herbs became part of a secret language, and among the cultures most fascinated by this quiet botanical symbolism was Victorian society, where even the smallest gift of greenery could convey affection, warning, sorrow, admiration, or disdain. The Victorians are often remembered for their formal manners, elaborate rituals, and restrained public behavior. Yet beneath that surface of etiquette lived an intense appetite for symbolic communication. Feelings that could not always be spoken directly were often expressed indirectly, through letters, objects, color, gesture, and especially flowers and herbs. This practice became known as floriography, the language of flowers, though herbs were very much part of it as well. In such a system, a bouquet was never merely decorative. It could be a coded message, a confession, a compliment, a rejection, or a warning tucked into petals and leaves. What makes this so fascinating is that herbs, which we often imagine as practical plants of the kitchen or medicine shelf, were drawn into the emotional theater of social life. A fragrant stem could mean something beyond its scent. A familiar garden plant might suddenly become a message. In this symbolic vocabulary, thyme came to represent courage. Basil, unexpectedly to many modern ears, could signify hatred. These associations feel almost startling now, precisely because they seem so unlike the gentle domestic roles these herbs often play in our imagination today. Thyme as a symbol of courage makes a kind of deep intuitive sense when one lingers on it. Thyme is a small plant, low-growing, often modest in appearance, and yet intensely aromatic. It survives in dry, exposed places, clinging close to the ground while releasing a scent far stronger than its size would predict. There is something brave in that disproportion, a small herb with a large spirit. Across older traditions, thyme had already gathered associations with vigor, strength, and even martial character. In some historical cultures, it was linked to bravery on the battlefield or to active energy of the soul. So when Victorian symbolism cast thyme as courage, it was not inventing meaning from nothing. It was inheriting and refining an older current of cultural feeling. Basil, on the other hand, is one of those plants whose symbolic history becomes wonderfully complicated. Today, many people associate basil with warmth, comfort, gardens, summer kitchens, and fragrant abundance. Yet, in parts of Victorian symbolism, basil could signify hatred. This seems almost shocking, as though a beloved herb had been assigned the wrong emotional role entirely. But symbolic systems are rarely straightforward, and plant meanings often shift across regions, eras, and traditions. Basil has carried different associations in different cultures: devotion, love, sacredness, protection, suspicion, even hostility. That instability is part of what makes herb symbolism so intriguing. A plant's meaning is never purely botanical. It is woven from stories, customs, beliefs, and historical accidents. This is an important reminder. Herbs do not carry meaning naturally in the way they carry fragrance or chemical compounds. Their symbolic lives are created by people. A society looks at a plant, notices its scent, behavior, color, rarity, or role in ritual, and begins to build interpretations around it. Over time, those interpretations may harden into custom. A flower becomes the emblem of fidelity. A herb becomes the sign of courage. Another becomes a warning. The plant remains itself biologically, but culturally it gathers a second body made of metaphor. There is something deeply human in this process. We are creatures forever searching the natural world for mirrors of inner life. We see patience in trees, sorrow in drooping flowers, resilience in weeds, purity in white blossoms, and intensity in fragrant leaves. Herbs, being so intimate to everyday life, were especially available for such projection. They lived near the body, near the kitchen, near the doorway, near prayer, near illness, near memory. They were not distant wilderness plants, but companions of domestic and emotional life. No wonder they became symbols as well as tools. In Victorian society, where emotional expression was often channeled through ritual forms, this symbolic richness could become almost theatrical. Imagine receiving a nosegay, a tiny bouquet tied carefully with ribbon. Every component might matter. The giver's selection could be interpreted like text. The recipient might search it for clues. Was the thyme meant as admiration for bravery? Was the basil a rebuke? Did the arrangement soften one meaning with another? The bouquet became a social puzzle, and herbs played their part in that coded exchange. Silence in such moments was not emptiness. It was loaded with botanical speech. What is especially beautiful about this is the way it broadens our understanding of herbs beyond use. We often ask what a plant does. Does it calm, heal, flavor, repel, nourish? But symbolic herbs also answer another question. What does a plant mean to the imagination? This question matters because human relationships with plants have never been merely functional. We do not live among herbs only because they are useful. We also love them, remember them, mythologize them, and allow them to stand in for feelings too delicate or too dangerous to state plainly. Even now, traces of this older symbolic instinct remain. We may not consciously send coded messages with thyme and basil, but we still choose plants for emotional reasons. Lavender suggests peace. Rosemary can evoke remembrance. Basil may feel generous and summery. Mint can feel fresh and renewing. A gift of herbs still says something, even if the vocabulary is looser than it once was. A potted plant offered to a friend is not just greenery. It is care made visible. A bundle of dried lavender implies rest. A kitchen herb garden implies warmth, nurture, and continuity. The Victorian system may have been more formalized, but the underlying impulse survives. We still let plants speak for us. There is also a subtle warning here against assuming that plant symbolism is universal. The meaning of herbs changes across time and place. One culture's sacred herb may be another's culinary staple. One era's sign of hatred may become another's symbol of hospitality. This fluidity is not a weakness. It is part of the richness of human culture. Plants travel through language, trade, ritual, conquest, migration, and reinterpretation, collecting new meanings as they go. Their symbolic lives are as mobile as their seeds. Perhaps that is why the language of herbs feels so enchanting. It reminds us that plants live not only in soil, but in imagination. A thyme sprig can be brave. A basil leaf can accuse. A bouquet can whisper what lips cannot safely say. The garden becomes not only a source of remedies and flavors, but a library of emotional symbols waiting to be read. And from this secret language of herbs, our journey now turns toward a more sobering truth. For just as people have often romanticized herbs as symbols of beauty, healing, and feeling, they have also made a dangerous mistake, assuming that anything natural must therefore be safe. The next chapter asks us to set aside that comforting illusion and look more carefully at the risks hidden in the green world. After drifting through the symbolic language of herbs, where thyme could stand for courage and basil could carry quiet hostility, we now arrive at a truth far less romantic, but absolutely necessary. Herbs may be beautiful. They may be ancient, useful, fragrant, and deeply woven into healing traditions. But none of that guarantees safety. One of the most persistent mistakes people make about the natural world is to assume that what comes from a plant must automatically be gentle, harmless, or wise for the body. It is an understandable belief. Nature feels older than industry, softer than chemistry, more trustworthy than something manufactured in a factory. And yet this belief, however comforting, can be dangerously false. The idea that natural means safe is not only incomplete, it can lead people into real harm. Some of the world's strongest poisons are natural. Some of the most irritating compounds known to the skin are natural. Some plants can damage the liver, affect the heart, interact with medications, or cause long-term health problems if used carelessly. Nature is not a moral category. It does not organize itself around human comfort. It produces beauty, nourishment, medicine, and danger all at once. Herbs belong to that full reality, not just to the comforting half of it. This is why it is so important to treat herbs with the same respect we give any biologically active substance. A plant may be sold in a tea blend, displayed in a garden, or praised in folk medicine, yet still carry compounds that are risky under certain conditions. A leaf may soothe one person and harm another. A traditional use may be valid in one form but unsafe in another. Dose, duration, preparation, body condition, and medical context all matter. These are not details. They are the difference between wise use and naive trust. A sobering example of this is comfrey, a plant long valued in traditional herbal practice, especially for external use. Comfrey has been admired for generations because it contains compounds associated with tissue support and has a strong reputation in folk traditions for helping with bruises, minor injuries, and skin-related applications. Its very name seems to suggest knitting together, mending, and comfort. It is the kind of plant that easily inspires confidence. People hear that it is natural, old-fashioned, and restorative, and they assume it must therefore be safe in all forms. But comfort carries a hidden danger that makes it one of the clearest examples of why herbal caution matters. When taken internally over long periods, comfort may expose the body to pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds associated with liver toxicity. That means a plant praised for healing in one context may become harmful in another, especially when swallowed regularly or used improperly. This is not a trivial caution. The liver is one of the body's great silent workers, processing substances day after day without drawing much attention to itself until something goes wrong. A herb that places chronic stress on the liver is not harmless simply because it grows in soil and has a long history. Tradition can preserve useful knowledge, yes, but it can also pass along practices that later require refinement, restriction, or warning. There is an emotional challenge in accepting this. People often turn to herbs because they are seeking alternatives they perceive as gentler than pharmaceuticals, more holistic than conventional medicine, or more connected to ancestral knowledge. These motivations are understandable and not inherently foolish, but they become risky when they harden into blind trust. The moment someone says, "It's only an herb," they have already forgotten the central truth. Herbs are pharmacologically active plants. That is precisely why they matter. Their power is not evidence of safety. It is evidence that they deserve careful handling. Comfort teaches another important lesson as well. The route of use matters. A plant used externally is not automatically appropriate internally. Skin and digestion are different thresholds. A preparation applied briefly to an area of the body is not the same as compounds entering circulation through repeated ingestion. Traditional herbalism often knew this distinction more clearly than modern casual use does. Problems frequently arise not from herbs themselves alone, but from the loss of context around them. A plant once used carefully for specific situations becomes marketed broadly, simplified, repackaged, and consumed without nuance. Safety is often lost in translation. The same caution extends far beyond comfrey. Many herbs can become problematic if overused, poorly prepared, contaminated, or combined with health conditions that change how the body responds. Pregnancy, liver disease, kidney conditions, childhood, older age, medication use, and chronic illness can all alter what is safe. Even a mild tea for one person may be inappropriate for another. This is not meant to create fear, but realism. The herbal world is not a toy chest of harmless remedies. It is a living pharmacy, and pharmacies deserve both appreciation and discipline. In some ways, the popularity of natural wellness has made this misunderstanding worse. The language of cleansing, detoxifying, boosting, and balancing can make herbs sound universally helpful, as though every leaf were a friend waiting to be trusted. But plants are not friends in the simple human sense. They are organisms with their own chemistries, developed for survival rather than for our convenience. We enter into relationship with those chemistries at our own risk and benefit. Respect begins when we stop sentimentalizing them. That respect does not diminish the beauty of herbs. In fact, it deepens it. To know that a plant can help and harm is to meet it more truthfully. Real herbal wisdom has never been based on naive optimism. It has always depended on discrimination. This herb for this purpose, this amount, this preparation, this body, this season, this caution. Traditional healers, when skillful, did not treat every plant as safe simply because it was natural. They observed, tested, remembered, and restricted. Knowledge grew not from idealizing plants, but from learning their limits. This is a mature way of loving the natural world. It allows us to admire herbs without worshiping them. It lets us appreciate old remedies while still welcoming modern toxicology and medical research. It protects us from the false choice between natural good and synthetic bad. In reality, both nature and modern medicine contain substances that can heal or harm depending on how they are used. Wisdom lies in understanding, not in tribal loyalty to one category. So when we hear that an herb is traditional, plant-based, ancestral, or organic, those words should invite curiosity, not automatic trust. What part of the plant is used? In what form? At what dose? For how long? In whom? With what known risks? These are not cynical questions. They are the questions that make herbal practice responsible. Without them, beauty and tradition can become a mask for danger. Comfrey, then, stands as a necessary reminder in our journey. Not everything green is gentle, and not everything old is safe in every form. The herbal world remains full of gifts, but gifts ask to be received with intelligence. To move through that world wisely is to keep wonder in one hand and caution in the other. And from this warning against the myth of harmless nature, our path now leads to an even more urgent truth. Some herbs do not merely pose general risks, but can directly interfere with powerful medications in ways that become life-changing, even life-threatening. The next chapter brings us to one of the most important examples of all, St. John's wort. After the cautionary lesson of Comfrey and the dangerous myth that natural always means safe, we now come to an even more serious and modern truth. Some herbs do not merely carry risks of their own, but can interfere directly with important medicines already inside the body. This is where herbal innocence ends completely. A plant is no longer just a tea, a capsule, a tincture, or a comforting idea from traditional healing. It becomes, in the clearest possible sense, a drug-like substance capable of altering the way the body processes other treatments. And among all the examples in the herbal world, few are cited more often or more urgently than St. John's wort. St. John's wort is a yellow-flowered plant with a long history of use for mood-related concerns, especially mild depressive symptoms. In herbal traditions and modern supplement culture alike, it has often been presented as a natural option for emotional heaviness, low spirits, or a sense of inner dimness. This reputation has made it enormously popular. For many people, the phrase natural antidepressant sounds reassuring, almost ideal. Something plant-based, seemingly gentle, and perhaps easier to trust than prescription medication. But this comforting image hides a much sharper reality. St. John's wort is not gentle in the sense of being biologically inactive. Quite the opposite. It is active enough to alter the body's handling of other drugs in ways that can be deeply consequential. What makes this herb so important from a safety perspective is its ability to affect enzymes and transport systems involved in drug metabolism. Put more simply, St. John's wort can cause the body to break down certain medications faster than expected. When that happens, the amount of medicine circulating in the bloodstream may drop, sometimes enough to reduce or even undermine the treatment's effect. This is not a vague theoretical concern. It is one of the clearest examples of an herb behaving like a pharmacological agent strong enough to reshape another therapy's performance. Two of the most serious examples often discussed are birth control pills and anti-rejection medications used after organ transplantation. If St. John's wort reduces the effectiveness of hormonal contraceptives, the consequences may include contraceptive failure and unintended pregnancy. If it reduces the levels of anti-rejection drugs, the stakes become even higher. A transplanted organ depends on carefully maintained medication levels to prevent the immune system from attacking it. In that setting, an herb is no longer a harmless supplement taken just in case. It becomes a possible threat to the stability of an entire medical treatment plan. That is why St. John's wort occupies such a powerful place in conversations about herb-drug interactions. It is the example that shatters the comforting assumption that supplements exist in a separate, softer world than real medicine. There is no separate world. Once a substance changes chemistry in the body, once it alters enzymes, transporters, blood levels, receptors, or metabolism, it belongs to the same serious reality as any other therapeutic agent. The label herbal may describe its origin, but it does not reduce its power. There is something especially deceptive about the way herbs like St. John's wort are often encountered. They appear on shelves beside vitamins, wellness teas, and products marketed in the language of balance, natural mood support, or emotional uplift. The packaging may look calm and friendly. The branding may suggest flowers, sunshine, or holistic care. Nothing about the presentation necessarily communicates the gravity of what the herb can do in combination with prescription drugs. This is one of the modern dangers of supplement culture. The setting can make potent substances feel casual. And yet, the body does not care how a product is marketed. It responds to chemistry. If a compound induces the metabolic systems that clear drugs more quickly, that effect remains real whether the capsule was purchased in a pharmacy, a health store, or an online wellness boutique. This is why communication with healthcare professionals matters so much. A doctor cannot account for an herb they do not know a patient is taking. A pharmacist cannot warn about an interaction that remains hidden. Silence, in this case, can be risky. St. John's wort also teaches a broader lesson about self-treatment. People often choose herbs for mood because emotional suffering can be private, persistent, and difficult to discuss. A plant remedy may feel less intimidating than formal medical care. It may seem more autonomous, more natural, more aligned with personal values. All of this is understandable, but mood-related herbs are not emotionally neutral substances. If they have the power to influence mental state, they may also have the power to interact with psychiatric medications, contraceptives, immunosuppressants, anticoagulants, antivirals, and other important treatments. The deeper the need, the more important proper guidance becomes. There is also a subtle irony here. The very reason St. John's wort attracts people, its reputation for helping with depression, is the same reason it must be taken seriously. A herb that genuinely affects mood is unlikely to be chemically trivial. If it can influence one meaningful process in the body, it may influence others. Herbal benefit and herbal risk often arise from the same source: potency. To want the first while denying the second is to misunderstand what herbs are. This does not mean St. John's wort is useless or fraudulent. It means it belongs in the category of substances that require informed handling. That distinction matters. Many harmful outcomes do not happen because an herb has no value, but because its value is oversimplified. People hear good for mood and stop there. They do not ask, good for whom, at what dose, alongside which medications, under what supervision, with what monitoring, and with what alternatives considered. But those are the questions that transform a risky guess into responsible care. In many ways, St. John's wort stands as the perfect emblem of herbal seriousness in the modern age. It is a plant, yes. It has tradition behind it, yes. But it also forces us to accept that the old boundary between natural remedy and real medicine was always, to some degree, an illusion. An herb can influence neurotransmitters, liver enzymes, and drug concentrations. An herb can change the outcome of treatment. An herb can help, complicate, or harm. Once that is understood, the conversation becomes more honest. This honesty is one of the greatest forms of respect we can offer the herbal world. To treat herbs seriously is not to reject them. It is to recognize their true nature. They are not decorative wellness accessories. They are biologically active gifts of the plant kingdom, carrying both promise and consequence. Some can soothe gently, some can nourish quietly, and some, like St. John's wort, can step into the body's medical landscape with enough force to alter the fate of other drugs. So the lesson here is clear and unforgettable. Never assume that an herb is harmless simply because it is sold without a prescription, wrapped in the language of nature, or rooted in tradition. If it affects the body, it can interact with the body's treatments. If it can change mood, it can change metabolism. If it can help, it can also interfere. St. John's wort makes that truth impossible to ignore. And from this sobering example of herb-drug interaction, our journey now turns toward a more hopeful and intellectually fascinating theme: the way modern pharmaceutical science still studies plants for inspiration. For even as herbs can complicate medicine, they have also helped create it. The next chapter leads us from caution back toward discovery, where willow bark and aspirin begin to tell the same story. After the sobering lesson of St. John's wort and the realization that herbs can interact with modern drugs in very real and powerful ways, it may be tempting to imagine the worlds of herbal tradition and pharmaceutical science as opposites, one ancient and natural, the other modern and synthetic, one rooted in gardens and folk memory, the other in laboratories and controlled trials. But this division, though common, is far too simple. In truth, the history of medicine is full of quiet continuities between plants and pills, between old remedies and modern chemistry. Again and again, pharmaceutical science has turned back toward the plant world, not as a museum of obsolete beliefs, but as a living source of inspiration. Many of the medicines we now think of as thoroughly modern owe at least part of their existence to compounds first noticed in herbs, trees, roots, or other healing plants. One of the most famous examples is aspirin, whose story reaches back to willow bark. Long before acetylsalicylic acid became a familiar name in medicine cabinets around the world, people had already observed that preparations from willow could help relieve pain and reduce fever. The exact language varied across cultures and centuries, but the relationship was there, a tree known through experience to have effects on the body. Willow bark was part of the old plant-based conversation about pain, heat, and bodily discomfort long before chemistry arrived to isolate, refine, and transform the relevant compounds into a standardized drug. That transformation is the key to understanding how herbs and pharmaceuticals are often connected. A plant may first be recognized through traditional use. This bark eases pain. This root calms the stomach. This leaf seems to affect the heart. This flower changes mood. Later, scientists begin asking more precise questions. Which compounds are active? How stable are they? Can they be purified? Can they be modified to improve safety, potency, absorption, or consistency? The laboratory does not always reject the plant. Sometimes it simply continues the plant's story in a different language. In the case of willow, researchers eventually traced its pain-relieving relevance to salicin-related chemistry, and over time this line of investigation contributed to the development of aspirin as a modern medicinal compound. What had once been encountered through bark, bitterness, and herbal practice became translated into controlled dosage and industrial production. The result was not the abandonment of plant wisdom, but its reconfiguration. The tree offered the clue. Science built upon it. This pattern appears again and again throughout the history of pharmacology. Plants are extraordinary chemists. Over millions of years, they have evolved complex molecules for defense, communication, attraction, survival, and adaptation. Some repel insects, some inhibit microbes, some alter animal physiology in ways that discourage grazing or infection. Humans, through careful observation, discovered that many of these same molecules could be therapeutically useful when understood and applied properly. In that sense, medicinal chemistry often begins as an act of attention toward what plants have already invented. There is something deeply humbling in this. Modern laboratories are rightly admired for precision, innovation, and analytical power, yet even the most advanced pharmaceutical work often starts with a natural template. A plant produces a molecule with interesting biological activity. Scientists isolate it, study it, test it, refine it, and sometimes create a safer or more effective derivative. Nature provides the first draft. Medicine edits. The relationship is not primitive versus advanced, but foundational versus developed. Herbal tradition and pharmaceutical science become chapters in the same long narrative. This helps correct another common misunderstanding: the idea that synthetic medicine is somehow fake, while herbal medicine is real. In many cases, synthetic or semi-synthetic drugs are real precisely because they are attempts to capture, improve, stabilize, or scale up something first encountered in nature. The distinction is not between truth and falsehood, but between raw complexity and controlled formulation. A plant may contain dozens or hundreds of compounds in varying amounts depending on soil, season, age, drying, and preparation. A pharmaceutical version seeks reproducibility. The same dose, the same effect profile, the same standard every time. Each approach has strengths and limitations, but they are not strangers to one another. Willow bark and aspirin form such a beautiful example because the continuity is easy to grasp. A tree once used in traditional pain relief becomes the ancestor of one of the most widely recognized medicines in modern history. When you hold that fact in the mind, the opposition between herbal knowledge and medical science softens. The hedge between them becomes more like a path. One leads into the other. Traditional noticing becomes scientific questioning. The village remedy becomes the research subject. The bitter plant becomes the standardized tablet. And yet, it is important not to oversimplify in the other direction either. A modern drug is not always just an herb in disguise. When scientists isolate or modify compounds, they may significantly change how those compounds behave, how strongly they act, and how safely they can be used. The controlled dosage of a pharmaceutical is not the same as chewing bark or brewing a traditional preparation. Context matters. Standardization matters. Side effects, delivery systems, metabolism, and purity matter. Respecting the connection between herbs and drugs does not mean pretending they are interchangeable. It means recognizing lineage without erasing difference. Still, that lineage is one of the most fascinating facts in the whole herbal story. It tells us that the garden and the laboratory are not enemies. The herb patch, the forest edge, and the pharmacy shelf are linked by curiosity. Someone once noticed a plant's effect. Someone later measured it. Someone else refined it. Across generations, the same human impulse persisted: to reduce suffering by learning from the natural world. The methods changed, the desire did not. This also explains why pharmaceutical companies and research institutions continue to study plants today. The green world remains a vast library of chemistry, much of it still only partly understood. New compounds, new interactions, and new therapeutic possibilities continue to emerge from botanical research. Even in the age of high-throughput screening, molecular modeling, and synthetic design, plants still matter. They remain mentors to medicine, offering structures and strategies that human science can investigate, imitate, or improve. In that sense, herbs are not relics of a pre-scientific past. They are living participants in the ongoing future of medicine. A lavender plant in the garden, a garlic bulb in the pantry, a turmeric rhizome in the market, willow bark in the history of analgesics. These are not isolated curiosities. They are part of a single continuum of attention, where observation becomes tradition, tradition becomes research, and research becomes therapy. Perhaps that is the deepest beauty of the aspirin and willow story. It shows us that wisdom does not always begin in institutions. Sometimes it begins with a person noticing that a plant changes pain. Sometimes it begins with bark brewed into a crude preparation. Sometimes it begins with folk memory, repeated often enough that science eventually asks why. What starts in the forest can end in the clinic. What begins as herb can become medicine in another form. And from this meeting place of old remedies and modern pharmaceuticals, our journey now reaches its final resting point, not in caution alone, nor in romance, but in practical wisdom. For after all these stories, the question remains, how should a person begin? The answer, perhaps, is gentler and simpler than expected, with one small pot, one balcony, and one careful step into the world of herbs. And so, after moving through ancient burials and clay tablets, through mint family gardens and parsley's hidden nutrition, through garlic's sharp medicine, turmeric's golden warmth, lavender's calm, aloe's cool relief, saffron's precious threads, Victorian symbolism, herbal caution, drug interactions, and the deep conversation between plants and pharmaceuticals, we arrive at the final truth of this journey. For all their mystery, power, and complexity, herbs do not ask us to begin grandly. They ask us to begin gently. That may be the most useful advice of all. If someone wishes to enter the world of herbs, the wisest beginning is not with a shelf full of supplements, dramatic health claims, or the urge to turn every leaf into a remedy. It is something much smaller and much more rooted. Grow one. Start with a single herb in a pot on a balcony, windowsill, doorstep, or patch of sunlight. Watch how it grows. Touch the leaves. Learn its scent at different times of day. Notice what kind of care it prefers. Observe how the plant changes with water, warmth, trimming, and neglect. Before using herbs as medicine, begin by meeting them as living beings. There is a quiet intelligence in this approach. Growing a herb teaches patience before prescription. It replaces abstraction with relationship. A person who has tended basil through a hot week, watched mint spread enthusiastically, or learned how slowly rosemary settles into a pot begins to understand that herbs are not generic, natural products. They are individual plants with distinct rhythms, personalities, strengths, and limits. This kind of understanding is far more grounding than reading a list of benefits online. Teaches respect. A small herb garden also restores scale. Much of modern wellness culture encourages people to think in dramatic transformations. Cure this, detox that, boost everything, optimize endlessly. Herbs suggest another model of health, one based on daily gestures, ordinary observation, and modest, repeated care. A few basil leaves in a meal, mint steeped into tea, parsley chopped over vegetables, lavender dried for fragrance. These are not theatrical acts. They are habits of closeness. And over time, such habits build not only knowledge, but trust of a more realistic kind. That trust matters because herbs are neither magical nor meaningless. They are not cure-alls, but neither are they mere decoration. To begin with a potted plant is to place yourself in the middle ground where real wisdom grows. You learn that herbs can be generous without being all-powerful. You learn that they have needs of their own. You learn that timing matters in watering, in harvesting, in cooking, in use. Most importantly, you learn that knowledge should come before confidence, not after. This is why learn before you treat may be the gentlest expert advice one can offer. Before using an herb as medicine, understand its identity. Which part is used? Leaf, root, flower, bark, seed, fresh or dried, internal or external, gentle or potent, supported by tradition, research, both or neither. Does it have known interactions? Is it appropriate for children, pregnancy, chronic illness, or medications? These questions do not make herbal life less beautiful. They make it safer, deeper, and more truthful. And perhaps growing herbs is the best first teacher because it naturally slows a person down. When you care for a living plant, you cannot rush everything. You must wait for growth. You must notice changes. You must respond to what the plant actually does, rather than what you hoped it would do. This mirrors the best kind of herbal learning. Real understanding of herbs comes through observation, humility, and repeated contact, not only through theories or headlines. There is also something quietly healing in the act of keeping herbs nearby, regardless of whether they are ever used medicinally in a formal sense. A pot of basil on a balcony changes the feel of a home. A rosemary plant by the kitchen door offers scent whenever brushed past. Mint near a window catches the light differently in the morning than in the evening. Lavender in a container turns a small outdoor corner into a place of calm. Even before herbs heal the body, they often soften a person's environment. They make daily life more fragrant, attentive, and alive. In this way, the beginner's herb pot becomes a kind of doorway. Through it, one learns that herbs belong simultaneously to several worlds: gardening, cooking, beauty, household care, symbolic meaning, and medicine. But it is wise not to rush straight to the last of these. Medicine is the deepest end of the pool. Better first to wade through scent, flavor, and growth. Better to know the plant's ordinary life before trusting it with the extraordinary task of healing. This approach also honors the reality we have seen throughout this journey. Herbs carry both gifts and risks. Garlic can fight microbes, but not replace appropriate treatment. Turmeric may support the body, but not in every form for every person. Lavender can soothe, but not solve all insomnia. Comfrey may comfort externally while posing internal danger. St. John's wort can help some people and endanger others through serious interactions. To begin gently is not timid. It is wise. It is the only beginning that leaves room for wonder and caution to walk together. And maybe that is the real lesson hidden in herbs themselves. They ask for a style of attention that modern life often forgets. Close observation, practical curiosity, and respect for small things. A leaf can matter. A scent can change the mood of a room. A root can carry medicine. A flower can become a symbol. A tiny pot on a balcony can begin an education that stretches backward through thousands of years of human history and forward into the careful choices of one's own daily life. So if you are standing at the threshold of the herbal world, wondering where to begin, perhaps the answer is already simple enough to fit in your hands. Start with one plant, learn its name, grow it in light, touch it often, smell it after rain or watering. Use it in food before you use it in remedies. Read about it from trustworthy sources. Let knowledge grow at the same pace as the leaves. In time, the herb will teach you what all the oldest traditions knew. That wisdom begins not with possession, but with relationship. And now, as this quiet journey through the world of herbs comes to a close, perhaps the garden around us has changed in your imagination. What once looked like a simple patch of green may now feel layered with memory, chemistry, beauty, caution, history, and care. The leaves are still small. The scents are still soft. Yet behind them stand Neanderthals, Sumerian scribes, healers, gardeners, cooks, pharmacists, and generations of ordinary people who looked closely at the plant world and found companionship there. Thank you for drifting through this long, fragrant night of herbal stories. If you've made it this far, I'd love to know which herb feels most meaningful to you. The one you trust, grow, remember, or simply love the scent of. And if this gentle exploration brought you a little peace, a little curiosity, or perhaps the urge to place one small pot of green on a windowsill, then the journey has already done something worthwhile. Until next time, may your evenings be quiet, your tea warm, and your home filled with the kind of calm only living plants seem to understand.